The Senate will come to order. Senator Murphy.
Good morning, Mr. President. I impose a call of the Senate.
Good morning. The Senate is now under call. Senator Murphy.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move that further proceedings under the roll call be dispensed with and that the Sergeant-at-Arms be instructed to bring in the absent members.
On that motion, all in favor say aye. All those opposed say no. The motion prevails. Members, if you'll be so kind as to stand. Members, in our tradition, we always start with prayer. And following the prayer, I ask you to remain standing for the Pledge of Allegiance, and today is no different. But I want to tell you that today's chaplain is the Reverend Dr. Gina Garrett from the First United Methodist Church in Redwood Falls, Minnesota. And again, as a gentle reminder, after the prayer, please remain standing for the Pledge of Allegiance.
Greetings to the leaders of the great state of Minnesota. I am humbled to lead you this morning to the throne of giving. Let us pray. We are living in tumultuous times. Leaders are oppressed on every side to make decisions that reflect equitable, free, safe, and economical laws impacting citizens to be self-sufficient, law-abiding, and ones that teach unity. It's hard, Lord, but with you, all things are possible. We petition you this day to touch minds, hearts, and decisions that they may become one in reflecting the better thing, the better purpose, the better cause for this great state. We cast aside every proud or misguided thought that prevents your purpose. Now, Lord, I ask that as we begin a new week, a new day, a new moment in the history of lawmaking, that you will continue to guide them in your purpose. When there are disagreements, always remind them of the question, is this the best way for our state? Help them to ask, is what I'm saying aligned with why I was elected? And am I fulfilling my promise agenda to make this place a better place to live? Remind them that every decision in some way affects every resident of this state and that each of them here have been empowered with a powerful duty to make this state not only even better, but the best. Now I decree and declare this a new day, a new beginning, a new charge. May this newness reflect hope, peace, unity, and your love. May your throne of giving this morning and each day give what is needed for each leader to speak with authority, but in peace. To not only speak, but to listen and hear with an open mind and heart. Remind each one here today that it takes the village of this body to come up with the right way. Lead them to a place of common goals and empower them each with your presence to know when it is the right thing, when it is the right way. As they wrestle in debates, let that wrestling end in sincere and true blessings for Minnesota and its people. I speak differences to become the melting pot of agreements that are agreements of common good. I speak a holy breeze of cleansing, joy, and respect. I speak love. Now, Lord, we are grateful for your leading and guidance and submit each mind and heart to you. In the name of he who has all authority to make this be, and he who has given all. Amen.
Thank you, members. The secretary will take the roll.
Abler, Anderson, Barr, Bolden, Carlson, Champion, Coleman, Swadzinski, Dames, Dibble, Dornick, Draheim, Drazkowski, Duckworth, Diedzik, Eichhorn, Farnsworth, Fateh, Friends, Green, Grunhagen, Gustafson, Hoschild, Herr, Hoffman, Housley, Howe, Jasinski, Johnson, Klein, Coran, Kroon, Kunish, Kupek, Lang, Latz, Liskey, Limmer, Lucero, Mann, Marty, Matthews, May Quaid, McEwen, Miller, Mitchell, Mohammed, Morrison, Murphy, Nelson, Oumou Verbeten, Pappas, Pa, Port, Pratt, Putnam, Rarick, Rasmussen, Rest, Seeberger, Utke, Weber, Wiesenberg, Westland, Westrom, Wickland, Zhang.
Members, a quorum is present. The following members intend to vote from a remote location under Rule 40.7. Senator Diedzik, Senator McQuaid, Senator McEwen, and Senator Port. Members, if you'd like to follow along as we go through today's agenda, please feel free to do so. I'm reading from today's Senate agenda, dated Monday, April 15th. We will begin at the third order of business. Messages from the House. The Secretary will read the message.
Mr. President, I have the honor to announce the passage by the House of the following Senate file as amended by the House, in which amendments the concurrence of the Senate is respectfully requested. Senate File Number 3567, a bill for an act relating to education, modifying provisions for pre-kindergarten through grade 12 education, including general education, education excellence, teachers, READ Act, special education, etc. Senate File Number 3567 is herewith returned to the Senate. Signed, Patrick D. Murphy, Chief Clerk, House of Representatives.
Senator Swadzinski for a motion.
Yeah, I'd like to move that the Senate do not concur in the amendment by the House, Senate File 3567, and that a conference committee of 3 members be appointed by the Subcommittee on Conference Committees on the part of the Senate to act with a like conference committee appointed by the House. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Swadzinski. Member Senator Swadzinski moved that the Senate do not concur in the amendments by the House to Senate File Number 3567, and that a conference committee of 3 members be appointed by the Subcommittee on Conference Committee on the part of the Senate to act with a like conference committee appointed on the part of the House. Members, that is the motion that is before you. All in favor say aye. All those opposed say no. The motion prevails. Members, we will now go to the Secretary reading the next message.
Mr. President, I have the honor to announce the passage by the House of the following Senate file as amended by the House, in which amendments the concurrence of the Senate is respectfully requested. Senate File Number 3852, a bill for an act relating to labor, making policy and technical changes to programs and provisions under the Department of Labor and Industry. Senate File Number 3852 is herewith returned to the Senate. Signed, Patrick D. Murphy, Chief Clerk, House of Representatives.
Members, I will call on Senator Murphy for a motion on behalf of Senator McEwen. Senator Murphy.
Thank you, Mr. President. On behalf of Senator McEwen, I move that the Senate do not concur in the amendments by the House to Senate File 3852 and that a conference committee of 3 members be appointed by the Subcommittee on Conference Committees on the part of the Senate to act with a like conference committee appointed by the House.
Thank you, Senator Murphy. Members, before the body, Senator Murphy, on behalf of Senator McEwen, moved that the Senate do not concur in the amendments by the House to Senate File number 3852, and that a conference committee of 3 members be appointed by the Subcommittee on Conference Committees on the part of the Senate to act with a like conference committee appointed on the part of the House. Any discussion on that motion? All in favor say aye. All those opposed say no. The motion prevails. Members, the Secretary will read the next message.
Mr. President, I have the honor to announce that the House refuses to concur in the Senate amendments to House File number 3436. House File number 3436, a bill for an act relating to transportation. The House respectfully requests that a conference committee of 3 members be appointed thereon. Tabke, Hornstein, and Petersburg have been appointed as such committee on the part of the House. House File number 3436 is herewith transmitted to the Senate with a request that the Senate appoint a like committee. Signed, Patrick D. Murphy, Chief Clerk, House of Representatives.
Senator Dibble for a motion.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, despite the fact that we sent a far better bill to the House, I move that the Senate accede to the request of the House for a conference committee on House File number 3436, and that a conference committee of 3 members be appointed by the Subcommittee on Conference Committees on the part of the Senate to act with a like conference committee appointed on the part of the House.
Thank you, Senator Dibble. Members, Senator Dibble moved that the Senate accede to the request of the House for a conference committee on House File number 3436, and that a conference committee of 3 members be appointed by the Subcommittee on Conference Committees on the part of the Senate to act with the like conference committee appointed on the part of the House. Any discussion? Seeing none to that motion, all in favor say aye. All those opposed say no. The motion prevails. Members, the Secretary will read the next message.
Mr. President, I have the honor to announce the passage by the House of the following House files herewith transmitted. House File numbers 4753, 4310, 4993, 3376, 1989, and 3438. Signed, Patrick D. Murphy, Chief Clerk, House of Representatives.
Members, there's no action that is required from this body. Members will now proceed to the 4th order of business, first reading of House bills. The House files have been given their first reading and referred as indicated. Senator Murphy.
Mr. President, I move to lay House File 4310 on the table.
On that motion, all in favor say aye. All those opposed say no. The motion now prevails. Members, we will now proceed to the 5th order of business. That is reports of committees. Senator Murphy for a motion to adopt the committee reports.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move the committee reports printed in the agenda and the addendum be adopted with the exception of the reports pertaining to Joint Rule 2.03.
On that motion, any discussion? Seeing none, all in favor say aye. All those opposed say no. The motion prevails. Members, we will now proceed to the 7th order of business, second reading of House bills. The Secretary will read the House file number.
House File number 3454.
The House file has been given its second reading. We will now proceed to the 8th order of business. That is introduction and first reading of Senate bills. The bills listed on today's introduction calendar are given their first reading and referred as indicated with the following changes. Members, if you want to see the changes, look on page 1. You'll see Senate File number 5430. That bill is referred to the Committee on Jobs and Economic Development. You can then proceed to page 2. You'll see Senate File number 5437, and that bill has been referred to the Committee on Judiciary and Public Safety. As I mentioned, members, the bills listed on today's introduction calendar are given their first reading and referred as indicated. Members, we will now proceed with the 9th order of business, motions and resolutions. We will adopt the author's motion as one motion. All in favor say aye. All those opposed say no. The motion prevails. Members, you also notice that Senate Resolution number 91 will be referred to the Committee on Rules and Administration. The Secretary will report Senate Resolution number 92.
Senators Murphy, Johnson, and Champion introduced Senate Resolution number 92, a Senate resolution recognizing Minnesota Senate employees for their years of dedicated service.
Senator Murphy.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move to adopt Senate Resolution number 92.
To the resolution, Senator Murphy.
Thank you, Senator Champion, President Champion, and members. I have the privilege of moving Senate Resolution 92, which is a resolution that recognizes the dedicated service of staff who have worked for this body for 5 years, 10 years, 25 years, and 30 years, and 40 years. And I just want to take a moment to say that while we, each of us in this chamber, have the opportunity, the privilege, and the honor to represent the people of Minnesota and cast our votes for policy or against policy that we believe is the best course for the people of Minnesota, we do not have that honor, that privilege, or that responsibility without the people who also work here, our staff. And regardless of the role that they're filling, the work that is happening here for the people of Minnesota is dependent upon their dedication, their commitment, their skill, and their smarts. And it is right that we honor them for that work, and I'm grateful to support this resolution today.
Thank you, Senator Murphy. Members, remember that this is to adopt Senate Resolution number 92. Is there any discussion amongst the body? Seeing none, there will be no further discussion. All in favor, say aye. Aye. All those opposed, say no. The motion prevails and the resolution is adopted. The Secretary will report Senate Resolution number 93.
Senators Murphy, Johnson, and Champion introduced Senate Resolution number 93, a Senate resolution recognizing Minnesota Senate employees for their dedicated service.
Senator Murphy.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move to adopt Senate Resolution number 93.
To the resolution, Senator Murphy.
Thank you, Mr. President and members. As I have said before, the work of this body does not function without the dedicated, committed, smart staff that work with us every day. On behalf of Senator Johnson, the Minority Leader, myself, and the members of this body, I ask for your support for Senate Resolution number 93.
Is there any discussion on Senate Resolution number 93? Seeing none, all in favor say aye. All those opposed say no. The motion prevails. Remaining under motions and resolutions, Senator Murphy to designate today's special orders.
Thank you, Mr. President. Pursuant to Rule 26, I designate the following bills be made special orders for immediate consideration. Members, the list is on your desk.
Members, that is correct. The special orders list is on your desk for today, April 15, 2024. We will begin with House File number 3631, Senator Pappas for miscellaneous capital projects and appropriations. Senator Pappas.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move that the amendment made to House File 3631 by the Committee on Rules and Administration in the report adopted April 11, 2024, pursuant to Rule 45, be stricken.
Thank you, Senator Pappas. Senator Pappas moves that the amendment made to House File 3631 by the Committee on Rules and Administration in the report adopted April 11, 2024, pursuant to Rule 45, be stricken. Any discussion on that motion? Seeing none, all in favor say aye. Say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed say no. The motion prevails. Senator Pappas.
Thank you, Mr. President. In case people were wondering what we're doing, especially if you're new to the Senate, is when a House file comes over, it's been passed the House floor, the Senate language is automatically inserted into the House file. What I am doing is I'm striking the Senate language and we are taking up the House language. And the reason we're doing that is because we had a pre-negotiation on 64 provisions that are in this modification bill. They're provisions that we've passed in previous sessions, most last year, but some from previous sessions. And they've been greatly vetted by the 4 caucuses and by the 4 leaders. And we have a signed agreement supporting all of them because these negotiations over bonding provisions are very delicate. I'd like to really thank the staff that worked on these. As I mentioned, there are 64 provisions, and they've been thoroughly vetted by staff and by Minnesota Management and Budget staff as well. Thanks to them. Thank you to Rachel Carlson, Fatima Acosta-Mendoza, Stephanie James, Hannah Grunwald-Noldner, Nate Pasco, my minority lead, Senator Karen Housley, and her staff. And I would, the list is on your desk. I know you all really want me to go through all 64, but I think you probably can read them yourself, take a quick look, and I would greatly appreciate your support. Now that this is passed, we'll move on to this year's capital investment bill. Thank you.
Any other discussion on House File number 3631? Seeing none, the Secretary will give the bill its third reading.
House File number 3631, a bill for an act relating to capital investment, amending previous appropriations for capital projects.
Third reading. Any other discussion on House File 3631 for final passage? Seeing none, the Secretary will take the roll on final passage of House File 3631. Members, remember that because this is a capital investment bill, it would take 3/5 of the body to approve House File 3631. Senator Morrison, for those voting pursuant to Rule 40.7.
Thank you, Mr. President. I report an aye for Senator Dietzig.
Senator Dietzig votes aye.
Mr. President, I report aye for Senator McQuaid.
Senator McQuaid votes aye.
Mr. President, I report aye for Senator McEwen.
Senator McEwen votes aye.
And Mr. President, I report aye for Senator Port.
And Senator Port votes aye. All senators having voted who desires to vote, the Secretary will close the roll. There have been 57 ayes and 9 noes. The bill is passed and its title agreed to. Members, we will now go to House File 4024, Senator Fateh, for the Omnibus Higher Education Policy Bill. Senator Fateh.
Thank you, Mr. President. The bill before us today complements and builds off of the work that we were able to do in last year's higher ed budget bill. System-wide, Minnesota State colleges and universities are projecting an enrollment increase for the first time in 10 years. This increase is the most pronounced at our two-year community and technical colleges with a 3.5% jump in enrollment since last year. The local impact of increased enrollment will be felt across our state in communities like Minneapolis, Faribault, Moorhead, International Falls, Anoka, Worthington, St. Cloud, Rosemount, and dozens more. This means an upskilled workforce meeting critical shortage areas. It means Minnesotans earning more and spending more at local businesses. It means more young people staying and building a future in their hometowns rather than losing them to out-of-state schools. It means saving faculty and staff positions from cuts due to declining enrollment, and you don't need to look too hard to figure out why that is. As Chancellor Scott Olson said, these enrollment increases are attributable to the investments made last year by the higher education budget in areas like the North Star Promise and freezing tuition at Min-State. Our bill today is focused on solidifying a bright future for Minnesota students and post-secondary institutions. A key focus of our committee has been making investments and crafting policies to boost student retention. We're on the right track with increasing enrollment, but to really see the benefits, we need to retain students and make sure they successfully complete their degree or credential. I want to highlight quickly just a few key areas of the bill. We have language to reduce barriers to transcript access, particularly for incarcerated students or low-income folks who need transcript to take advantage of employment opportunities. There's also language to establish a Bill of Rights for pregnant and parenting students and designate navigator staff on each campus to assist these students as they balance raising young children and pursuing a degree. And more than 1 in 5 college students are parents. And when we provide more targeted resources to parenting students, we can increase persistence and degree completion and provide more support to these young people. We're codifying some very important rights and protections for students with disabilities to create more equitable access to higher education for everyone. This language will increase transparency and equity around which types of documentation are needed to establish accommodations for students and requires institutions to do more outreach to students about beginning the accommodations process. This bill also ends the practice of legacy admissions in Minnesota, ensuring that admissions decisions are made based on the applicant's merit, leveling the playing field for first-generation students. We're updating campus sexual violence prevention policies on campuses to ensure that our students feel more safe, and I want to specifically thank Senator Port for authoring this language and being a leader on this issue in this legislative body. This bill also places some common sense guardrails on online program management companies, or OPMs, closing a federal loophole allowing these companies to profit off of a percentage of the tuition dollars from each student they enroll. I also want to draw attention to one of the challenges our committee has encountered this session. The Fostering Independent Grant Program, or FIG, is a financial aid program for students who have been in the foster care system, providing the full cost of attendance for these students. Thanks to the leadership of Senator Rarick, this program passed in 2021 and it began in 2022. What we know is that this program is working. Not only does this program help fosters enroll and persist in college, it also helps these students pay for things like food and housing. We know those who age out of the foster system are at high risk of experiencing homelessness, and the Fostering Independence Program helps foster youth maintain stable housing. This program is working, and this program is popular. Because of the soaring interest in the FIG program, costs are projected to exceed the amount we appropriated to the program in fiscal year 25. The bill before you includes policy language from the foster advocates to address potential shortfalls in the program. But because this is a policy bill, however, it doesn't address the appropriation piece. We will just close this shortfall and fully fund this life-changing program in the Omnibus Higher Education Finance policy bill that we will take up later this session. And so I want to say thank you to all the members who had a hand in crafting this bill. As always, this legislation is first and foremost about the students, and I believe this bill before us today does right by them. And with your permission, Mr. President, I'd like to offer the A6 amendment.
The A6 amendment, did you say, Senator Fateh?
Yes, Mr. President.
Senator Fateh offers the A6 amendment. The Secretary will report the A6 amendment.
Senator Fateh moves to amend House File Number 4024 as amended pursuant to Rule 45 as follows. Page 34, line 15, delete Pell Grant. This is the A6 amendment.
Senator Fateh, to your A6 amendment.
Yeah, this is a technical fix to the language, deleting unnecessary references to the federal Pell Grant program.
Any other discussion on the A6 amendment? Seeing none, all in favor say aye. All those opposed say no. The motion prevails and the A6 amendment is adopted. Senator Kupek.
Thank you, Mr. President. I would like to offer the A7 amendment.
Senator Kupek offers the A7 amendment. The Secretary will report the A7 amendment.
Senator Kupek moves to amend House File Number 4024 as amended pursuant to Rule 45 as follows. Page 46, delete lines 18 to 23 and insert. This is the A7 amendment.
Senator Kupek, to your A7 amendment.
Thank you, Mr. President. This is the section of the bill that deals with the OPMs. This will make just clarifying language here, also just kind of opening up a little more sunshine onto these contracts that some of our public institutions are entering with. So it just states that they must disclose third-party relationships between the online program, the company, and the institution, and all recruitment and marketing communication from online program management companies must receive prior approval from the institution.
Any other discussion on the A7 amendment? Senator Rarick.
Thank you, Mr. President. Would the author of the amendment yield for a question?
Senator Kupek, will you yield? He will yield. Senator Rarick.
Thank you, Mr. President. Senator Kupek, can you also describe to us what is being deleted in the amendment?
Sure, absolutely.
Senator Kupek, to the question.
Just let me pull that up. Sorry, I don't have the line in front of me here. 46.
And when you're ready, Senator Kupek.
Sure.
And members, just so you know that this is referring to the online program management. So when you hear those acronyms, OPM, I just want you to know what it stands for. Page 46.
Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you, Senator Rarick. Here's what we are taking out. We are taking out the line that says the online management company self-identifies as a third-party identity. So we're changing it around to make sure that they're listed on here as being identified that way for students going forward, knowing who these companies are dealing with. Also, any digital or print advertising provided by the program online management company for academic programs or institutions includes a clear disclosure of third-party relationships. So it's just kind of tweaking that language just to make it a little clearer.
Senator Rarick.
Thank you, Mr. President, and would the author continue to yield?
Senator Kupek, will you yield? He will yield. Senator Rarick.
Thank you, Mr. President. Senator Kupek, as we move forward with this piece around the OPMs, there have been concerns by some of the schools, especially the three that currently are using them. Will this amendment continue to allow them to be able to operate, these three schools to operate with the online program manager and also be able to renegotiate the contract with them, that they will be able to continue operating in the way that they have to bring these online services to our students?
Senator Kupek, to the question.
Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you, Senator Rarick. So the contracts that currently exist will continue to exist. This only goes into future contracts. When they do renegotiate, it is my understanding that some of this new language will have to be reviewed and gone through under the new guidelines when they do renew.
Senator Rarick.
Thank you, Mr. President. Will the author yield for one more question?
Senator Kupek, will you yield? He will yield. Senator Rarick.
Thank you, Mr. President. Senator Kupek, as they go through that process, if it is upfront and made public, will they be able to continue with the contract as it is, or would they have to come up with a completely different type of contract for reimbursement?
Senator Kupek.
Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you, Senator Rarick. It is my understanding from the way this language is that the tuition sharing portion would not be allowed under new contracts going forward, and they would have to find a new method of payment, but certainly they will still be able to operate within the state.
Senator Rarick.
Thank you, Mr. President. So, members, this amendment is a good step forward, but I do believe we have to continue discussions around this piece that is in the bill. In particular, like I said, there are 3 schools in Minnesota right now that use an OPM, and that helps them bring their programs online to the non-traditional student as we know today. The method that these groups use in partnering with the schools is one that they put the money up front to get the program online, and then they get reimbursed from the school as students participate. If we do away with this pay model, the schools will likely have to put that money up front themselves to get the programs up and running, and that will be very detrimental. I would recommend, and I will be voting yes on this amendment, but I also believe there needs to be further work in this area of the underlying bill. Thank you, Mr. President.
Any other discussion on the A7 amendment? Seeing none, let me just pause. Were you going to say something, Senator Fateh? Sorry about that. Senator Fateh.
No worries, Mr. President. Thank you, Mr. President. Please vote yes on this amendment.
Yes, go ahead, Senator Fateh.
I consider this to be a friendly amendment. Please vote yes.
Any other discussion? Seeing none, all in favor say aye. All those opposed say no. The motion prevails and the A7 amendment is adopted. Senator Mitchell.
Thank you, Mr. President. I would like to move the A10 amendment.
Senator Mitchell offers the A10 amendment, and the Secretary will report the A10 amendment.
Senator Mitchell moves to amend House File Number 4024 as amended pursuant to Rule 45 as follows. Page 33 after line 21, insert. This is the A10 amendment.
Senator Mitchell to your A10 amendment.
Thank you, Mr. President. The A10 amendment would allow disabled veterans to attend the University of Minnesota Landscape Arboretum with one guest free of charge. This was actually something that was brought to me by Senator Lang, which I greatly appreciate. When I was putting together the Veterans Omnibus Bill at that time, I hadn't had time to personally reach out to the Arboretum to make sure that they were okay with any lost income that would come in, but we have since been able to do that, and Senator Fateh has very graciously agreed to include this in the bill here today. So again, this would be for disabled veterans, and all parties are in agreement that this would be able to happen, and I think it's something wonderful that we can do for our disabled veterans. Thank you so much.
Any other discussion on the A10 amendments? Senator Coleman.
Thank you, Mr. President. I want to thank Senator Mitchell. I wasn't expecting her to present this today. I was going to offer this as an amendment myself, so you're saving me the work here, and I greatly appreciate it. This initiative is a bill I was carrying that Senator Lang was kind enough to offer in committee, and Senator Fateh is kind enough to include in his bill today. The Landscape Arboretum is a place where disabled veterans from around the state, but particularly in Carver County, like to get together, and they said it's actually therapeutic time for them. And so I greatly appreciate the efforts to get this across the finish line and include it, and thank you all for the support.
Senator Abler to the A10 amendment.
Well, thanks, Mr. President. Just to echo that, and I appreciate that I guess we can work together and look after different veterans who have a disability. I think the chance of them getting to go to enjoy the Arboretum will continue to reflect the appreciation we have for their service and then the effects of what that service has caused. So thank you, Mr. President.
Senator Fateh.
Thank you, Mr. President. I appreciate the work of Senators Lang, Mitchell, and Coleman on this, and I consider this to be a friendly amendment.
Any other discussion on the A10 amendment? Senator Mitchell, you want to say anything, or can I go right to the vote? All right. All in favor of the A10 amendment, say aye. All those opposed, say no. The A10 amendment is adopted. Any other discussions on Senate file number 4003? Senator Rarick.
Thank you, Mr. President. I would like to offer the A2 amendment.
Senator Rarick offers the A2 amendment, and the Secretary will report the A2 amendment.
Senator Rarick moves to amend House File Number 4024 as amended pursuant to Rule 45 as follows. Page 11 after line 16, insert. This is the A2 amendment.
Senator Rarick, to your A2 amendment.
Thank you, Mr. President. Members, a lot of what we talked about in Higher Education Committee is exactly as Senator Fateh said, making school more affordable for students. And I had some concerns last year around the North Star Promise that was passed. I have concerns, and I've worked with Chair Fateh around some concerns with how that interacts with private scholarships and foundation money. But I also have a big concern around this and how we limited it. The fact that so many students around the state of Minnesota decide to attend a private institution because it has the program that best benefits them or meets their needs the best, and yet the private schools were excluded from this program. And many people try to argue that this, by including them, that is benefiting the institution. But this scholarship is for students. And that's what this amendment does. It allows the student to be able to choose where they will go with that North Star Promise scholarship. It opens up all of the institutions in Minnesota to have students come who are using and have qualified for that program. Mr. President, I would ask that members vote yes to support our students, that they can go where they choose to go and attend the program that most meets their needs.
Senator Klein.
Mr. President, I request a roll call.
Roll call requested, roll call granted. Senator Duckworth.
Thank you, Mr. President. I appreciate it. Would Senator Rarick yield for a question?
Senator Rarick, will you yield? He will yield. Senator Duckworth.
Thank you, Mr. President. Senator Rarick, I'm wondering, as it relates to your amendment, does it call for the spending of any new money, or does this already have the potential to be covered with what's already been budgeted?
Senator Rarick.
Thank you, Mr. President. Senator Duckworth, this amendment is not appropriating any new money. When you look at last year's analysis and how much was put into it, into the North Star Promise, the numbers we've run and the information we've received from the private colleges, there is enough money in this program currently to meet the needs. There would be no need for any new appropriations.
Senator Duckworth, to the A2 amendment.
Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you, Senator Rarick. And members, I hope if you're happy to pay attention to the discussion today, you just heard something that's very important as it relates to this amendment. Senator Rarick just helped us all know and understand that by voting yes today on his amendment, we can help even more students in the state of Minnesota who are attending colleges find them more affordable. We can help their families afford their tuition bills. No longer will the ability for them to get help from the state of Minnesota just be limited to certain colleges or universities that happen to be public. Our fine students in Minnesota who are attending private colleges and universities who meet the same income requirements for eligibility would also be able to benefit from this. And oh, by the way, the money's there. We don't have to spend any more. The money set aside isn't being fully exhausted. So why wouldn't we help more kids? Why wouldn't we help more families? Folks, this is about as common sense as it gets if you take politics completely out of the equation and ask yourself if you're going to cast a green vote right now for the betterment of students, their opportunities. When it comes to higher education, it would be a very easy green vote. Please vote in support of Senator Rarick's amendment. Let's provide more opportunities for students that are attending colleges and universities here in the state of Minnesota. Thank you.
Members, before we go to the author of the A2 amendment, I want to know if anyone else wants to talk about it. Senator Fateh, to the A2 amendment.
Thank you, Mr. President. Will the author of the amendment yield for a question?
Senator Rarick, will you yield? He will yield. Senator Fateh.
Thank you, Mr. President. Senator, has a fiscal note been completed?
Senator Rarick.
Thank you, Mr. President. There has not been a fiscal note appropriated for this in particular. As we ran through the numbers, what is being appropriated from the North Star Promise Act and what was presented last year by the colleges, it fits within what was in last year's appropriation. So we did not feel a new fiscal note was needed because it fit within and there would be no new appropriations required.
Senator Fateh.
Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you to the author, Senator Rarick. As you and everyone knows in the chamber, I am the fiscal hawk of my caucus, and this kind of large amounts of change would require careful consideration and fiscal modeling in committee. What we've seen is that the estimates have shown, I believe it's 18 million per year in change for this equalization Act. Yeah, the Promise Equalization, I apologize. And with that, the North Star Promise hasn't even started yet. It's going to start in August 2024. So everything we've seen around it has just been projections. And what we've learned with the FIG program is that projections can be off or way off. And my worry is that before a program even begins, that we are going to harm our public institutions and our students without knowing what results are coming in from the program. So I do appreciate your amendment, Senator Rarick. I'm willing to work with you and talk with you through the interim about this, but for now I'll have to say no, vote no to the members. Thank you.
Senator Oumou Verbeten.
Thank you, Mr. President. I just want to speak against this amendment. First and foremost, I think we have a duty to fund our public institutions. And there is a role for our private institutions to play. That's why we increased the state grant by $45 million last year. There are adequate resources there, but it's really important that we keep these dedicated funds for the North Star Promise. I also want to make sure members are aware that we don't have tuition control measures over our private institutions. We have those over our public institutions. And in fact, last year, we instituted a tuition freeze at Minnesota State. So when we continue down this model of high tuition, high aid, we increase the amount that we're giving in vouchers to private institutions, and they increase their tuition. Don't support this amendment.
Senator Putnam.
Thank you, Mr. President. Would Senator Rarick yield?
Senator Rarick, will you yield? He will yield. Senator Putnam.
Mr. President, Senator Rarick, could you point to the spot in the bill that references the North Star Act or the statute in which it was founded?
Senator Rarick, to the question.
Thank you, Mr. President. Let me get the... It's on, well, of the, so it's in going into page 14 or page 11. But because it is under the heading, the Promise Equalization Scholarship, we are tying in, I believe, when you look at line 1.12 to 1.13, and we're saying we're under section 136A, 121. If I'm remembering my numbers correctly, that is where we are linking it and tying it to the North Star Promise. I can do some cross-reference with our staff to verify I'm correct with that, though.
Senator Putnam.
Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you, Senator Rarick, for that clarification. My question was that part of the line of inquiry that we've initiated already here is that our desire is to help the most students. Mr. President, I think everyone in this room shares that desire. But these resources don't just disappear They are part of this program, and as part of this program, they are still going to help students. This is not a question of helping this student or that student, because both the North Star Promise and our private schools help students. Now, I will say that one of the assumptions that motivates a lot of these conversations, which is disturbing to me, is that private schools are somehow better than public schools. I've been a professor at a private school for 20 years. That's proof that they aren't that good. That's supposed to be a joke. If they would hire me and let me teach there for 20 years, all right, it's a good school. I'm just teasing. But I do want to say, members, that we have a responsibility to support our public schools. And this resource that we have right now reaches a student who was not thinking about going to school. Private schools are excellent. They're wonderful places, and people choose to go to private schools because of fit, a choice of fit. But fit is not the same thing as access. The North Star Promise, friends, helps those students who didn't think they were going to college, who didn't even imagine that they could go to college. They're not choosing between a private school and a public school. They're choosing between going to school or not going to school at all. And that's why this program is so important. That's why we need to protect it and not pilfer from it. And that's why I encourage members to vote against this amendment.
Senator Duckworth, we are on the Rarick A2 amendment. Senator Duckworth.
Thank you, Mr. President. I appreciate it. You know, folks on the Higher Education Committee might often get tired of me hearing me say the phrase that a student is a student is a student. It doesn't matter where they're going to school, it doesn't matter where they've come from. The fact that they are a student here in the great state of Minnesota choosing to pursue higher education is all that matters. And I did not want this to turn into a conversation of public schools versus private schools, because that's not what it's about. It's about a student, period. Wherever they choose to go to school, whatever opportunities they choose to pursue. This isn't about a student potentially choosing between college or not college. This could be a student who desires to go into a particular field of study or a particular program that only happens to be offered at a private college or university. Well, what we're saying with this amendment is great. If they're eligible for the same metrics as the North Star Promise, just because their program happens to be offered at a private institution that may also be closer to home, well, they should be eligible, the same as a student who would go to a public school, to utilize those funds to further their education and better their future. That's all that it's about, Mr. President. It has nothing to do with public versus private. It's about students, period, regardless of where they may choose to pursue that opportunity. I have a question for the bill author when he returns to his desk. But I just want to continue to help folks understand this is not public versus private. This is simply about whether or not you happen to be a student in the state of Minnesota. And getting back to the question as it regards to funding, on lines 1.15 and 1.16 of Senator Rarick's amendment, the words are this: based upon the funds available for the program. So this is not going to harm public colleges or universities or students. This says if the funding's there and there's still more that can be utilized for students, why wouldn't we also allow folks that are attending private colleges or universities to also benefit from this? Why would we not allow their families to also experience some financial relief? You know, you can try to overcomplicate this. You can try to make this not simple by making it a private versus public issue, or you can strip away the politics of the issue and simply ask yourself this question: if the money's there and students are eligible, should we allow them to utilize the funds, regardless of where they happen to go to school, to further their education, better their future, and take care of their higher education needs? The answer to that is quite simply yes. Mr. President, I would ask if Senator Fateh would yield for a question.
Senator Fateh, will you yield? He will yield. Senator Duckworth.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Senator Fateh. Senator Fateh, you authored a bill. It may not be the exact amendment before us, but you authored a bill that had to do with equalization. In the very way that we're talking about right now, I co-authored that bill with you, and I appreciate you, formulating that bill and dropping it. So my question to you is, should we? I know you're saying no to this amendment currently, but should the fact that you have dropped a bill, which is very similar to the amendment we're about to vote on, can we take comfort in the fact that you are trying to signify to us and to students out there that you are open to a conversation about their eligibility to receive some of the same funding, should they be eligible under the same exact financial need that's demonstrated for folks that would benefit from the North Star Promise in a public college or university?
Senator Fateh, to the question,
Thank you, Mr. President, and thank you, Senator Duckworth. Yes, I agreed to author legislation that almost mirrors this amendment after speaking with the Private Colleges Council, some of the students, and members of the committee as an act of good faith to talk about or to have ongoing discussions about how to help our students within the private institutions. So yes, and I'm willing and I'm looking forward to continuing those conversations in the interim.
Senator Duckworth.
Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you, Senator Fateh. So as we conclude this discussion, members, I hope folks realize this issue is not going away. People realize and understand the fact that there are students and families out there who are not getting the same opportunity to benefit from folks that some students and families are being able to benefit from. And if we're not leveling the playing field and allowing all of our students the same opportunity for success as they pursue their higher education, then we're failing them. So I hope that those conversations continue in good faith. We have the opportunity to solve the problem right here, right now with a green vote on Senator Rarick's amendment. But if for some reason common sense should not prevail and that amendment fails, I hope, if not by the end of this session, that by next session we are passing a bill that does provide for equalization for all students and their families across the state of Minnesota, regardless of where they happen to pursue their higher education. Thank you, Mr. President.
Senator Jaskowski.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, members, and for Senator Putnam, the language in the bill is on page 14 of the bill. And I've been reading up on the North Star Promise. I remember the discussion last year. But let's review what this is. And I don't know what type of promise it is for the taxpayers of Minnesota who have the money extracted from them every day, the hardworking taxpayers. But what we have instead here is an entitlement program that Senator Fateh wrote into the bill last year, Mr. President. What this provides is if you are a student at a public higher ed institution in Minnesota, and your parents earn less than $80,000 a year, Mr. President, you are given a free education by the hardworking taxpayers of Minnesota who may themselves already have paid off their student loans, Mr. President. And I really wonder if members here who voted for this last year really wonder what kind of salt that grinds into the wounds of the people of Minnesota that are trying to pay their bills and recover from this inflationary environment that we're in here right now. But the way this is written in Senator Rarick's amendment brings this to light, Mr. President. It seems almost as if deliberately private schools have been left out of this discussion. As a matter of fact, and contrary to what Senator Putnam said earlier, this is not funding for higher education. This is money that goes directly on the behalf of students. This follows the student, if you will. And what was left out is all of those students that attend private schools throughout Minnesota. And Mr. President, I would ask if Senator Putnam would yield for a question.
Senator Putnam, will you yield? He will yield. Senator Jaskowski.
Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you for yielding, Senator Putnam. So, Senator Putnam, you said you teach at a private school. Are your students that are at that private school, are they Minnesota students?
Senator Putnam.
Mr. President, Senator Jaskowski, can I ask you to clarify your question a little bit? Do you mean are they current residents of Minnesota, or are they from Minnesota? Do they stay in Minnesota? What do you mean by Minnesota students, if it's fair to ask?
Senator Jaskowski.
Thank you, Mr. President. If Senator Putnam would yield again.
Senator Putnam will yield. Senator Jaskowski.
Thank you, Mr. President. So, Senator Putnam, let me say it differently. If the students at your school attended a public school, would they suddenly become eligible for the North Star Promise money where they are not when they attend your school now?
Senator Putnam, to the question.
I'm sorry, Mr. President and Senator Jaskowski, I still don't fully understand the question. What I can say, however, is that some people have, I think, perverted this discussion in that the issue is about keeping Minnesota students in Minnesota. That's the primary motivation here behind the North Star Promise. It is not, in any sense, to take anything away from private schools so much as it is to keep students in the state of Minnesota. But again, I'm sorry, Senator Champion, I'm not being obtuse. I'm not entirely sure where my good friend Senator Drazkowski is going with this.
Senator Drazkowski.
Thank you, Mr. President. Well, Senator Putnam is having a hard time fielding a pretty simple question. Thank you, Senator Putnam. We have before us a bill that is attempted to be amended and corrected. If the policy of this body is to simply give away money in the form of, in the bill, it's called gift aid. Gift aid. And before this bill passed, I hadn't heard that term before. Maybe I haven't read every part of statute, Mr. President, but gift aid taken from hardworking taxpayers in Minnesota and given to somebody simply because they attend a public institution and their parents happen to earn less than $80,000 a year. It is just given to them. And we aren't going to, in here, the intent seems to be, speaking of intent, Senator Putnam, the intent appears to be to not give the money, the gift aid, to kids who happen to attend a private school. Mr. President, that's called discrimination. This bill blatantly, perfectly discriminates against private school students. And we have the majority here supporting the continuance of this discrimination when Senator Rarick, Mr. President, brings an amendment to fix it so that our policy is no longer discriminating against students who happen to be attending a public school. Mr. President, would Senator Fateh yield for a question?
Senator Fateh, will you yield for a question? Senator Fateh, will you yield for a question? He will yield for a question. Senator Drazkowski.
Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you for yielding, Senator Fateh. I don't know if you've been listening, Senator Fateh, but your North Star Promise legislation discriminates blatantly and perfectly against students who attend public school or private schools. Do you support that policy continuing to go forward?
Senator Fateh, to the question.
Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you, Senator Drazkowski. I do believe that as a legislative body, we do have a higher obligation to support our public institutions and our public colleges and universities.
Senator Drazkowski.
Thank you, Mr. President. Another Democrat who has dodged the question that is before us, Mr. President. I could ask maybe more to yield. I might get the same dodge because this is a blatant discrimination against a portion of our student population here in the state of Minnesota. And Mr. President, members, when we go to vote on this, Mr. President, by the way, has a roll call been asked for on this?
Roll call has been requested and the roll call has been granted. And from time to time, members, that just brings up a good point. If you want to know if a roll call has ever been requested and granted, you can look on the board and right there on the right side, on the bottom, we have our roll call. Senator Drazkowski.
Thank you, Mr. President, for that. I will read that. I've been busy reading the discrimination in our law that was written by the majority last year. And members, if indeed you would like to continue with this discriminatory policy that blatantly and perfectly discriminates against private school employees who may be very, 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 very similar to other students who are attending public schools and very likely are, if you want to continue that discrimination, vote against this amendment. And I suspect that's what the majority is going to do because, Mr. President, it was written into the law last year that way, and that was the intention to begin with, to discriminate against students who attend private schools. And that, sadly, Mr. President, it is a very sad day in Minnesota when we see activity on the Senate floor that blatantly, the majority blatantly wants to continue discriminating against a segment of the student population here in the great state of Minnesota. Thank you, Mr. President.
Senator Fateh.
Thank you, Mr. President. I don't see it as discrimination. Actually, we have one of the most generous state grant programs, and we increased it last year. That benefits our private colleges, number one. Number two, would Senator Drazkowski yield for a question?
Senator Drazkowski, will you yield? He will yield. Senator Fateh.
Thank you, Mr. President, Senator Drazkowski. We've seen across the board increase in admissions, projected admissions, after seeing over a decade of declining enrollment over the up till this year. Minnesota State College Southeast is projected to have an increase of 10% after seeing a steady decline in enrollment. So are you against the program increasing the enrollment in your own district, Senator Drazkowski?
Senator Drazkowski to the question.
Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you, Senator Fateh. Well, Senator Fateh, as we see the woke majority here continuing to bring more and more socialist policies like yours that was written into law, it's now law, Mr. President. As we see more and more woke policies that institute socialism in this state, whether it's free education paid for by people who are out there working every day, or free food, or free cars, or free phones, or free anything, Mr. President, you're going to get more of it. And Senator Fateh, you know that, and I know that. When you give something to somebody for free, you're going to get more participation. That is obvious to every Minnesotan, and it should be obvious to every senator here today. Thank you, Mr. President.
Any other discussions on the A2 amendments? Senator Putnam.
Thank you much, Mr. President. I got to say that I'm a wee bit confused in a certain sense. Today is kind of a strange day in that we have our arch-conservative, fiscal conservative Senator Fateh and our protean socialist Senator Drazkowski, who, ironically enough, is arguing to expand a program he despises, which is something that I find kind of curious, because if Senator Drazkowski recalls, what they're talking about is an amendment that would make this program bigger. And yet, I'm hearing it characterized as stealing from taxpayers, of decreasing the intensity of work that students are going to do. And I've heard this argument a number of times about this bill, that if you don't pay for something, it doesn't have value. That's not true. Our students, when they go to school, are spending time and industry and effort. Just because you don't have to pay as much for something doesn't mean it has less value. Time is so much more valuable than is just the cost of tuition. And I can tell you this too, as someone who was in graduate school for 10 years after my undergraduate degree, that was 10 years that I didn't earn a living wage. Had I started working 10 years earlier, I would have a much more robust retirement opportunity, and I don't have to be here. So think about the costs we pay when we go to school, the costs we pay to participate in a complicated public, because those costs aren't all financial.
Senator Farnsworth.
Thank you, Mr. President. I have a few thoughts on this, but I just want to make sure that I'm clear about something before I tell a couple of stories, because we just heard that this amendment is attempting to expand this program, and so I'm wondering if the senator from Pine City, Senator Rarick, would yield for a question.
Senator Rarick, will you yield? He will yield. Senator Farnsworth.
Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you, Senator Rarick. I'm just wondering, would this expand in any way the amount of money that is spent? And part two of the question, would this take anything away from any of the public school institutions?
Senator Rarick, to the question.
Thank you, Mr. President. Senator Farnsworth, this amendment would not increase an appropriation into the North Star Promise. When we look at, it was talked about Senate File 4668 was a bill that was offered that this amendment was based around, and it estimates about $18 million is required to cover students who are at private institutions who would qualify. And this program, the estimates are out there that it is approximately $47 million in excess as what is going to be needed for our public institutions and the students who go there. So even if we use this fund to fill the foster grant program, and we then include the private school students, there is still enough money left in the North Star Promise program that even if the projections were vastly underestimated, there is still a large amount of money available to cover those increased costs. But the money is there. This amendment would not require a new appropriation to the North Star Promise program.
Senator Farnsworth.
Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you, Senator Rarick, for that answer. So basically, the math adds up. We're not taking, so we would be taking unused funds from a program that already exists and use it to provide flexibility for schools who attend different schools. I think about a couple of stories. So, Mr. President, I attended both public and private college, finest university in Minnesota, the University of St. Thomas. I'm sure that Senator Putnam would agree with that. And my first semester there, I did work study in the cafeteria, and I was in the back doing dishes. And so you get to talking to the other people that do work study in the cafeteria, and one of them I think of in particular, because I remember he talked about why he took the work study job in the cafeteria. And the reason, Mr. President, was that back then, I don't know exactly if it's the same where you have to buy meal plans today in college, but you had to buy a meal plan, and you could get 5 meals per week or 7 or 10, or you could buy all 21 meals. And he said that when he was able to do work study in the cafeteria, then he would have to buy 5 less meals on his meal plan because he couldn't afford to feed himself. And so he did work study. Now, this is a student at a private college who couldn't afford to feed himself, who could have used a little bit of extra help. I think of another student. So in the summers when I was at the finest university in Minnesota, I did a program called Summer Conference. And what we would do is we would get to stay on campus for free, and we would get paid to clean the dorms for conferences that would come. There was another student there, and I learned through the course of becoming friends with him that the reason he took the summer conference job is that he didn't have anywhere to live in the summer, Mr. President. This is another private college student. There are lots of students at our private colleges that have great need, Mr. President. There are a lot of low-income students, and if we're going to offer this program to public schools, we should also offer it to our students who have this high level of need in private schools. So I would encourage the body to vote yes on this amendment. Thank you, Mr. President.
Members, before we go to the author of the A2 amendment, I want to make sure that we've given everyone an opportunity to speak who desires to speak to the A2. Seeing none, the last, is there someone else that wanted to say something? Senator Fateh.
Thank you, Mr. President. And while I appreciate Senator Rarick for bringing forward this amendment, I just want to remind folks that there is no fiscal note. This is based entirely off of projections. And for me, this is seen as being fiscally irresponsible. And as the chair of higher ed, I was tasked with reining in on our spending. So I apologize, Mr. Rarick. I have to vote no.
Any other discussions before we go to the author of the A2 amendment? Because once we go to the author, that's the last voice that you will hear before the secretary takes the roll. Seeing none, Senator Rarick, to your A2 amendment.
Thank you, Mr. President. And thank you, members, for this great discussion. And thank you, Chair Fateh. I do plan on continuing to have discussions with you and try to work on this. Again, Mr. President and members, I do believe this is an amendment that we should be adopting. And to address some of the comments that as we have this discussion, and then there is a higher obligation from this body to our public institutions over our private institutions. But Mr. President, that's why in the higher education realm, we appropriate money directly to the University of Minnesota system and to the Min State system. We do not do that for private institutions. And this amendment and the program that we are discussing is not an appropriation that goes to any individual institution. It is going to students so that they can attend an institution of their choosing if we adopt this amendment. Mr. President, members, maybe we need a little perspective as well as to who is out there and where students are going that qualify under this program. Mr. President, 36% of Pell Grant recipients attend private colleges in Minnesota. Mr. President, I'm going to repeat that. 36% of the Pell eligible recipients attend private colleges. Mr. President, 34% of students of color and Native American students pursue bachelor's degrees in this state attend the private colleges. Mr. President and members, those are the folks we are leaving out if we do not adopt this amendment. Those students chose those schools because they have a program that meets their needs. Why would we leave them out of this promise? Why would we force them to leave the institution that best served their needs to go somewhere else to make school more affordable? Mr. President, we need these schools. They turn out a lot of our teachers. They turn out a lot of folks in the business realm. Our public institutions cannot fill the complete need we all hear from people around the state of the demands in the workforce that are needed. We need all of our post-secondary institutions training people to meet those needs. We should absolutely be adopting the A2 amendment so that students can go to the programs that best fit their needs so that we can deliver the workforce that Minnesota requires. Please, members, vote green on the A2 amendment.
The Secretary will take the roll on the A2 amendment. Members, please vote. Senator Morrison, for those voting pursuant to Rule 40.7.
Thank you, Mr. President. I report that Senator Dietzig votes no.
Senator Dietzig votes no.
Mr. President, Senator McQuaid votes no.
Senator McQuaid votes no.
Mr. President, Senator McEwen votes no.
Senator McEwen votes no.
And Mr. President, Senator Port votes no.
And Senator Port votes no. Senator Jasinski, for those voting pursuant to Rule 40.7.
Thank you, Mr. President. Senator Anderson votes aye.
Senator Anderson votes aye. All senators having voted who desires to vote, the Secretary will close the roll. There being 32 ayes and 35 noes, the A2 amendment is not adopted. Senator Rarick.
Thank you, Mr. President. I would like to offer the A3 amendment.
Senator Rarick offers the A3 amendment. The Secretary will report the A3 amendment.
Senator Rarick moves to amend House File Number 4024 as amended pursuant to Rule 45 as follows. Page 14, line 13, after the second comma, insert. This is the A3 amendment.
Senator Rarick, to your A3 amendment.
Thank you, Mr. President. Members, this amendment seeks to protect Minnesota taxpayers with the North Star Promise program that we adopted last year and that will begin in this coming school season. And I think we should be making sure that the people who take advantage and use the program to further their education in Minnesota are Minnesotans. They're children of Minnesota families. And that's what this amendment gets at, to make sure that the Minnesota taxpayers' money that is going to support this program to make post-secondary education more affordable for our students and to meet that demand in our workforce, that we are doing it to promote Minnesota students to stay here, to use that program, and not be attracting folks from around the country and around the world to basically take advantage of Minnesota taxpayers. I believe we instituted this program for Minnesotans, as was stated earlier, to keep them here in Minnesota, and this puts some guardrails around it to make sure that this is for Minnesota students. Thank you, Mr.
Members,
President.
as a gentle reminder, we're on the A3 Rarick Amendment. Senator Fateh to the A3 Amendment.
Thank you, Mr. President. I recommend a no vote.
Any other discussion on the A3? Senator Grutenhagen.
Oh, thank you, Mr. President. Yeah, I rise in support of the A3. I think it's a very prudent amendment. You know, I have been a consistent opponent of providing benefits for people who come here illegally to the state of Minnesota. And this amendment would include that. Here's, you know, it's not that I'm against immigration. I'm for legal immigration. What I oppose is illegal immigration. Does that mean I strongly don't like the illegal immigrants? Members, I have 2 large companies in my district that have quite a few illegal immigrants working for them, some seasonal, some year-round. I've personally helped out financially and otherwise illegal immigrants who are having problems or distress in their situation. I'm not against them as human beings. What I want to do is not incentivize them to come through a gauntlet of exploitation from Mexico on up here. What do I mean, members? Well, for one thing, when you incentivize them by giving them benefits, we're giving them a driver's license, we're giving them health care, 125, and so on, you incentivize people to come here illegally. And when they do, they go through a gauntlet of human exploitation. Some of them die of dehydration out in the desert. Other ones, the women and children are raped and some murdered by the cartels. In addition to that, if we look at the cartels themselves, they're being enriched with millions and millions of dollars for bringing the illegals across the border. The thing is, and they use that money to promote drugs. So when we provide benefits for illegal immigration, we also bring fentanyl into this state. And we know what fentanyl does. It's killing our young people in this state and nation. You know, I just looked up a couple of statistics on that, members. And last year in 2023, the estimated overdoses and deaths by fentanyl in the U.S. was 112,000. That means in 2 years, you're over 200,000. And to put that in contrast, members, in 19 years in Vietnam, we had 58,000 casualties that were killed in action. So think about what you're doing, members. Illegal immigration is bad for our state, it's bad for our nation, but you know who it's worse for? The illegal immigrants themselves. And then we have according to published reports, we have 85,000 illegal immigrant children missing that are subject to labor exploitation or sexual trafficking. That's what you're doing, members. We need to bring people here legally, and we definitely need legal immigration. Let us not continue to pile on additional benefits to incentivize these poor people, and I don't blame them for wanting to come to the U.S., but let's not incentivize them to go through that gauntlet of exploitation. You know, and I have to say, the Biden administration is a disgrace for not enforcing our immigration laws.
Senator, I've been very patient We're on the A3 amendment. All comments must be on the A3 amendments. I have allowed, this is a gentle reminder to all, I've been really flexible with your ability to argue about the amendments. But when we start talking about other things outside of this amendment, please, Senator, let's reframe all comments only to the A3 amendment that is before the body. Senator Grudenhagen.
Yeah, Mr. President, I would say this particular amendment does prohibit people who come here illegally from receiving the North Star benefits. So everything I said is pertinent to the benefits that are going to be paid out under North Star. Secondly, members, just a minute. If we look at other states also, New York, Chicago, California, it's just, to continue to give additional benefits to incentivize illegal immigration is going to be an economic disaster. That's what's going to happen. Again, we want them to come here illegally. And think of the immigrants who stand in line to come here legally. They take the time and the price to come here legally. Now, when they do, they have a much better chance of becoming part of the middle class. When they come here illegally, they have less of a chance of experiencing the American dream and becoming a part of the middle class. So, members, please vote for this amendment. Let's not further incentivize the exploitation of these immigrants. They're women, they're children, amongst a host of other things. So please vote green. Thank you, Mr. President.
Senator Klein.
Mr. President, I request a roll call.
Roll call requested, roll call granted. Senator Putnam.
Thank you, Mr. President. I just would like to refocus a little bit back to higher education. If you look at the actual bill itself, the North Star Promise bill itself lists 10 possible requirements for residency. All states have requirements for residency, and you must meet these requirements to be eligible for the North Star Promise Act. Members, I point your attention to the last of these, which is either a member or a dependent of a member of the National Guard. Now, I was just talking to our good friend, Senator Mitchell. It is unlikely, but it is absolutely possible that a dependent of a member of the National Guard could not be a citizen, could not be a resident of the state of Minnesota. Now, I'm going to say again, it's unlikely, but it's possible. If we adopt this language, that person, that child of a National Guard service member would no longer be eligible for the North Star Promise. That's one of many reasons to vote against this amendment.
Senator Duckworth. Any other discussion before we go to the author of the amendment? Senator Drazkowski.
Thank you, Mr. President. Members, we have again before us a bill that creates an entitlement for people to attend college. If their parents earn less than $80,000 a year, the state of Minnesota is simply going to give, in the form of gift aid, money to these students to attend college, essentially free college. The Democrats created free college in this law last year, Mr. President, and I think Senator Rarick has identified a blatant hole in our current law, and I don't know if would Senator Fateh yield for a question, Mr. President?
Senator Fateh is not on the floor. Oh, there he is. Senator Fateh, will you yield? He will yield. Senator Drazkowski.
Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you, Senator Fateh. So, Senator Fateh, you're the author of the North Star Promise. When you wrote the bill, did you know that illegal aliens could participate in this program and get the gift aid that the North Star Promise promises?
Senator Drazkowski, I was just informed that he will not yield. So, Senator Drazkowski.
Thank you, Mr. President. Sounds like you didn't like the question, Mr. President. I don't blame him, Mr. President, because the reality is when this policy was written and adopted by this body 1 year ago, the language contained a change in policy that would allow people with ITINs, individual tax identification numbers, to be able to receive this aid and other aids as well, not only in the area of higher education, but in the area of health and human services, taxes, and a wide variety of others. So it was contemplated, Mr. President, somewhere along the way in the process last year in the development of the bill that came forward, was adopted by this body and the other body, and signed into law by the government. It was contemplated to make certain that people who didn't have Social Security numbers had the ability to access this free gift aid. It was written into the bill. As a matter of fact, Mr. President, it only takes an illegal alien coming to Minnesota. By the way, there's, in the last nearly 4 years, there's been about 8 million of them invading our country, stepping, as Senator Gruenhagen pointed out, ahead of the line in front of people working to get here legally and doing the right thing. 8 million of them coming here from all countries across, many countries across the world, coming here, in this case, to take advantage of our generous and numerous benefits that the social policies of the woke left here in Minnesota brought forward and enacted into law last year. And here we now have, it takes 7 weeks, Mr. President, for an illegal alien coming to our country to get an ITIN. 7 weeks is all it takes for them to access this free money that was earned by the hairdresser in Mankato, or by the construction worker in Jordan, or by the airline pilot in Pine City, or anywhere in this state. They earned the money and worked hard, and the Democrats essentially are giving it out in gift aid, and that's what we have here, and making it available, in this case, Mr. President, to illegal aliens that violate the law the first thing they do when they step into our country. Now, the hardworking people in Minnesota don't appreciate that. They want the money to instead be used by people who are here legally. And Senator Rarick's amendment fixes this, Mr. President. It fixes it by making certain that if it is going to be the policy of the people of Minnesota to give free tuition to people whose parents earn less than $80,000 a year, his amendment says, at least let's make sure they're here legally. Let's at least make sure they're following the laws of our state and country. That's what it attempts to do. But instead, you're going to see, Mr. President, you're going to see 34 votes against this common sense amendment. When we're done here voting today, you're going to see 34 red votes. Voting, and that vote, Mr. President, is going to be a vote to continue to give this free aid money earned by hardworking Minnesotans to people that are including people who come here illegally. Vote yes for the common sense amendment. Vote for the rule of law that has so much been eluded by this legislature, and support the Rarick amendment. Thank you, Mr. President.
Members, we are on the A3 amendment. The last voice that you'll hear will be that of the author of the amendment. I just want to make sure that we recognize everyone before we go to the author, because that will be the last voice you hear before we take a vote. Senator Rarick.
Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you, members. As I had stated earlier today, and I think many Minnesotans agree, we struggled with accepting the North Star Promise last year. Many people much prefer the scholarship program. I would have loved to have seen that get far more of the increase in funding. It goes out to students across the board, again, in public and private institutions. But the fact is, we have the North Star Promise, and I'm trying to make it as good as it can be by working with Chair Fateh, again, how it works with some of the private scholarships and foundation monies. And was stated earlier, there are already guidelines and guardrails as to who can use this, because I think the Minnesota taxpayer is expecting that if this is what we at the legislature decided to do, that they at least expect that we're doing it for their families and their neighbors here in Minnesota. And that this is one more guardrail that was missed in last year's that we should be having, so that the hardworking Minnesota taxpayer is supporting Minnesotans to get into our job market and here to increase the things and to benefit Minnesota. So, Mr. President, members, I would ask a green vote to support the Minnesota taxpayers who fund this program.
The Secretary will take the roll on the A3 Rarick amendment. A roll call has been requested and a roll call granted. Please vote, members. Senator Morrison, for those voting pursuant to Rule 40.7.
Thank you, Mr. President. Senator Dietzig votes no.
Senator Dietzig votes no.
Senator McEwen votes no, Mr. President.
Senator McEwen votes no.
And Mr. President, Senator Port votes no.
And Senator Port votes no. Senator Jasinski, for those voting pursuant to Rule 40.7.
Thank you, Mr. President. Senator Anderson votes aye.
Senator Anderson votes aye. Members, we're waiting for one additional member. Members, just as a gentle reminder, can you stay close to the chambers? All senators having voted who desires to vote, the secretary will close the roll. There being 33 ayes and 34 noes, the A3 Rarick Amendment is not adopted. Senator Nelson.
Oh, thank you, Mr. President and members. I have the A4 amendment. I want to thank...
Senator Nelson offers the A4 amendment. The secretary will report the A4 amendment.
Senator Nelson moves to amend House File Number 4024 as amended pursuant to Rule 45 as follows. Page 33, after line 21, insert. This is the A4 amendment.
Now, Senator Nelson, you may discuss your A4 amendment.
Thank you, Mr. President and members. I'm hoping the A4 amendment will be a friendly amendment. I want to thank the author of our higher education bill for including something that has been very important to Minnesotans and this body for a number of years, and that is academic freedom. So I salute that part of the bill. However, I would very much, Mr. President and the good senator, I would like to amend this section of the bill because we also need to talk about academic freedom for the students. And that is what the A4 amendment does. It offers those academic protections to students. And I hope it's a friendly amendment. I'll maybe ask the chair right now if it's a friendly amendment, if he will yield. That will determine how many comments I make.
He is not at his desk. He's doing something at this point. You want to continue, and then I can come back to you when he's at his desk, Senator Nelson.
Yes, I'm going to continue. Even though I'm optimistic, it should be a friendly amendment.
And there are a couple other folks who could potentially fill in some of that time in order to make sure that you can get your question answered. Senator Nelson.
Okay. So let me just mention the genesis of this, why it is so important. We know that students need academic freedom, and particularly when I think about academic freedom in colleges, in our higher education institutions, we have seen a lot lately about how important that is for students to have that academic freedom. So they are not graded on their thought process about controversial issues, but obviously they're assessed on those things that are political, that are inherent to the class before them. Their assessment should be based on appropriate knowledge of the subjects and disciplines studied, and prohibits discrimination on the basis of political, ideologically, or religious beliefs. Members, that is the third point in this amendment. We're just adding subdivision 3, which addresses student rights just much as subdivision 2 addresses the rights of faculty and instructors. Because it's so important, I want to make sure that we talked about the assessment being based upon knowledge of the subjects and discipline studies, and discrimination not being allowed. And also, it's important that we ensure our learning environments, our curriculum, and our instruction honor free student inquiry and discussion. And I'm going to ask if the author would yield, Mr. Chair, Senator President.
Senator Fateh, will you yield? He will yield. Senator Nelson.
Thank you, Mr. President. Senator Fateh, I'm presenting the A4 amendment, which is really just further building upon the good work you did in Section 39, Subdivision 1, 2, and 3 regarding academic freedom. I'm asking you if it's a friendly amendment. If it's a friendly amendment, I will cease my comments. If not, I'm going to continue to talk why it's so important that this amendment passes to actually protect students' academic freedom in assessment and in not being discriminated in our higher education institutions.
Senator Fateh, to the question.
Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you, Senator Nelson. I will say no at this time, and I'll pass it off, if possible, to the author of this portion of the bill, Senator Putnam.
Who did you say that the author of this portion
Senator
is?
Eric Putnam.
Senator Putnam.
Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you, Senator Nelson. I believe the question that we're dealing with now is if this is a friendly amendment, and I will say no, I oppose it.
Oh.
And I'm looking forward to hearing more of Senator Nelson. That's the real reason why I oppose it.
Senator Nelson.
Thank you, Mr. President. and a good senator from St. Cloud. Just as we have academic freedom for faculty, it's really unconscionable that we would not have academic for students. For example, students are, in a sense, subordinate to their college professors. We look very harshly on those type of protections for those who are in authority over others. Would you really want your 18 or 19-year-old daughter to be afraid in class to speak? Or would you want her to be graded based upon her political ideology instead of, as the amendment says, requiring student assessments to be based on appropriate knowledge of subjects and disciplines studied, and prohibit discrimination on the basis of political, ideological, or religious beliefs? And the author of this part of the bill wisely spoke about making sure that educators and researchers were not necessary. They didn't have to, without interference from political figures. Why would you allow that type of protection for educators, for faculty, higher ed faculty, and researchers, but not for their students? That just does not make sense. In addition, the amendment, just to make sure everyone's clear, point 1, prohibits faculty in their official capacity from requiring students to express specified social or political viewpoints for the purpose of academic credit. I don't know how one could be opposed to that. Are we suddenly sending our kids off to college so they can be graded not on the subject matter, but on their social or political viewpoint? Is that what we're doing? I think that is a sham, and that is not what education is about. So I will, and let me list the fourth one too, just to make sure everyone knows these 4 simple academic freedom protections for Minnesota higher education students. The fourth one simply says that we'll restrict the introduction of controversial matters without a relationship to the subject being taught. So members, I'm sad that this was not considered a friendly amendment. I'm shocked that it's not considered a friendly amendment. And I will be asking for a roll call.
Roll call requested, roll call granted. Senator Kroon.
Thank you, Mr. President. I stand in support of the A4 amendment. There's few things I like more in general than respectful, robust, diverse, and good faith debate. And that is particularly true for the university. Viewpoint diversity is critically important in higher education. But the power imbalance between professors and students makes that a challenge, makes that difficult. If a student believes their grade is impacted by which particular side they take on a social or a political issue, that has a chilling effect, Mr. President. That too often results in self-censorship, and I think many of us have heard stories from university students who talk about that self-censoring that they do in their classroom, and I really do think that that's a shame because what it does, Mr. President, it deprives all students of receiving the best educational experience possible. So I support a green vote on the A4. Thanks, Mr. President.
Members, remember we are on the A4 amendment, and before we go to the author of the amendment to have the last word, I want to make sure that we've had a chance to cover each person. Senator Pratt.
Thank you, Mr. President, members, and I stand in support of the A4 amendment. When I was an undergraduate, I was intimidated. I was an economics major at the University of Colorado, and I had to write my papers from a particular viewpoint. It was only a professor that took me under his wing and helped me identify how I could write my papers in such a way that I could express what I was really learning and what I was really feeling. Students should not be intimidated in the classroom. At our higher ed institutions, we should be allowing for that free flow of discussion and information, of ideologies. To say that one group has academic freedom and the other group doesn't flies in the face of that very tenet. If we're going to have true academic freedom, if we're going to have true discussion, if we're going to have true debate, all parties, all stakeholders need to feel that their First Amendment rights are being upheld. We should not tolerate discrimination of any kind, particularly when it comes to speech. So I thank Senator Nelson for bringing this amendment, Mr. President, because this gets at the very heart of what we talk about in academic freedom and what we expect from our institutions of higher education. Members, please vote in the affirmative.
Members, anyone else before we go to the author of the amendment? Senator Nelson is the last voice you'll hear, and then we will, oh, I'm sorry. Did I miss a couple of people? It looks like everyone's jumping up at the last minute. Senator Putnam.
Thank you, Mr. President, for acknowledging me. I appreciate that. You know, when I was first named chair of the Agriculture Committee, I think there was a great deal of confusion about that. Why is a college professor the chair of the Agriculture Committee? And one of the things that I learned immediately was that when you actually talk to people who do the job, you get a different perspective on that job. And I think that that's something that everyone in politics needs to take truer to heart, is that we need to be a little bit more curious and a little less judgmental, a little bit more engaged in on the ground what's already happening, than in our ideas or our political motivations. Now, I say that to say that this amendment is 100% unnecessary. Institutions themselves have these rules. Faculty members themselves are committed to the pursuit of knowledge. And with the question of student empowerment is incredibly important to someone as me in particular. I teach debate. You might not know this, but I do have a PhD in rhetorical studies. I'm literally a doctor of argument. I've been teaching debate for 20 years. I was one of the founders of the University of Minnesota Parliamentary Debate Society. I've been involved in really, really difficult issues in the classroom every day for every day of my career as a professor and as a scholar. And at no point have I asked someone to agree with me, partially because they don't know what to say to agree with me. If you looked at my syllabus, you would have no idea of my political inclinations. Scholars and faculty members are already dedicated to open inquiry. And it's true, absolutely 100% true, that there are moments when these expectations are violated or when a scholar says something that they shouldn't say in classroom. That happens all the time. We say things we're not supposed to say in here, too. Sometimes people make those mistakes. And sometimes students enter into discussions with ideological curiosity or concern, sometimes growing from conversations like this one itself, where they see a bias that does not exist, where they get a bad grade and they say, oh, that's because my professor's a Republican. I've been in those conversations too. I think it's best to leave these discussions and these rules to the institutions and the professors who are already doing that and avoid the kind of government micromanagement in the classrooms in our universities across the state of Minnesota. Scholars are already dedicated to independent inquiry. That's what we do. That's our job. That's why we do what we do. This is, in that sense, unnecessary. But Senator Nelson said that this isn't what education is about, and I agree. She's totally right. But that's not what's happening in our classrooms. And if we're going to make a decision like this, we need to be on the ground and in those classrooms a lot more than we have been.
Senator Abler.
Well, thank you, Mr. President. And you know, if you're playing your bingo card, I wasn't thinking to get up and speak until I listened to my colleague, Senator Putnam. In the beginning, he says, well, I'm against it, and I want to hear why I should like it. And so Senator Nelson went on at some length, and other people have talked. And so, I'm going to ask him to yield in a second. But, you know, Senator Putnam, if you're correct, then you don't even need Section 39 of the bill giving academic freedom for professors. And I'm not going to ask you to tell me how many faculty members have been discriminated for engaging in political activities or voicing political views, because they all have political views, and no one's ever complained to me that they're punished in some way for holding a particular view. In fact, we have forums, and they invite both of us to come on both sides of the aisle. So I will, based upon your view that the student rights are already fine, I don't know why you need the section, but you know, Senator Putnam, sometimes we just need to feel reassured. So I'm going to ask you to yield, and would you please tell me why you oppose the first section of the bill, which is prohibiting faculty in their official capacity from requiring students to express specified social or political viewpoints for the purposes of academic credit. Why are you opposed to that? If he would yield, Mr. President.
Senator Putnam, will you yield? He will yield. Senator Putnam, directly to the question.
Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you, Senator Weber, for the question. It's a good question. I'll be honest with you, that's actually a totally valid, good question. But I will say that there are legal issues, there are local issues, and there are contextual issues. And one of the things that I bristle on a little bit is when we think we can tell teachers what to teach when they're the ones who've studied those things and they know what's going on. And I will also say I have had conversations with students, heartbreaking conversations with students who have felt that they got a particular grade because of their political view. And after a brief conversation, I found out that that probably wasn't the case. Their pain is real, though. Their anxiety is real. And the intimidation that our friend Senator Pratt was mentioning, all of that is real. But I will say that it is more likely that that variety of discrimination, since we're using that word, will be visited upon a faculty member in a way that is more consequential, perhaps, than in terms of likelihood and probability than in the classroom.
Senator Abler.
Well, thank you, Mr. President. And, you know, Senator Putnam, I find that answer totally unsatisfying to me. There are students who talk to me, and they feel absolutely intimidated because they have a view. And so I think it's belt and suspenders, and I don't think in here there's room to sue somebody. And I'm not going to prolong the debate to ask Senator Latz or Limmer to comment about if you can be sued based upon someone who may have implied that your credit's dependent upon your views. But this says they don't have to express a view. So let them not express a view. That's what. So let me try again. Senator Putnam, if you'd yield again, can you explain to me section number 2 of the bill to ensure that learning environments, curriculum and instruction that honor free student inquiry and discussion and are not for the purpose of political, ideological, religious, or anti-religious indoctrination. Pretty much that this would be for learning purposes. Can you tell me why you oppose number 2?
Senator Putnam will yield. Senator Putnam.
Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you, Senator Labor, for that question. The whole goal of the entire classroom environment is to foster critical thinking more often than not. That's critical thinking that's essential for the functioning of American democracy or for getting a job at some point. So the best way to fertilize that level of critical thinking is to have academics and scholars who have studied this material to the extent that they have in order to get the job that they've got, free to test and to push and to encourage critical reflection. And I will just briefly also give a quick anecdote, in that I frequently teach things that I disagree with. All the time, I teach things that I disagree with. And when I teach things that I agree with, I am actually more critical and I push even harder on them than I do in other circumstances, because the goal is to empower students, and I don't think that you empower students by restricting faculty voice.
Senator Abler.
Well, thank you, Mr. President. Maybe I should have summarized that section a little better. It was kind of long, but it just says, section 2 says, that it honors free student inquiry and is not for the purpose of indoctrination. And so, Mr. President, in about, I don't know, a few number of minutes, we're going to vote on this, and I'll predict that 34 of the members of this body are going to go like, no, we don't want to have students protected from indoctrination. So I'm trying to find a way to see what on this, I think, I represent a district, Mr. President, that's on the blue side. And I would think if I went to the doors, and I went to a lot, Mr. President, if you remember that, if I would ask them, do you think we should make sure that classrooms are not for indoctrination? I think they go like, I think that'd be good. How about free student inquiry? Yeah, we like that. Well, if Senator Putnam would yield again, I'm not going to belabor it that long.
Senator Putnam, will you yield? He will yield. Senator Abler.
And so number 3, Senator Putnam, I don't know why you're against this, requiring student assessments to be based on appropriate knowledge of subjects and prohibit discrimination on the basis of political, ideological, or religious beliefs. And Mr. President, I don't know, some things are so obvious, you go like, duh. And wouldn't it be nice if a student could be in a class and have a view that's the only view in that class, that it's different from the other 20 people? And it doesn't have to be they like MAGA, It might be they might like Hamas. They might think Hamas is amazing. And so if you're at a school and they're going to like punish you because you think Hamas is amazing, which I don't believe, or you think Israel is amazing, or you think that some historic black figure was amazing, or some historic white figure was amazing. And the way it's going, that student is not going to be given the freedom that they might think they have, and they may feel that they were discriminated against. If there's anything we're against, Mr. President, in this body, it's discrimination. And so I think we need to have students feel secure in this, and I want Senator Putnam to tell me why he thinks that this is something we can just ignore and risk these students are going to feel intimidated, because, Mr. President, they tell me they do feel intimidated.
Senator Putnam, to the question.
Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you, Senator Albert, for the question. We fundamentally agree. But here's the thing. One of the things I teach is argument and debate. And candidly, I do bristle a little bit when we talk about debate in this hall, because I haven't seen it yet, in terms of real debate. But one of the things that Aristotle would teach us is that a policy argument requires an indictment of the status quo. So in order to change, there's got to be a problem that's clear. And so when we go to number 3, student assessments to be based on appropriate knowledge of subjects and disciplines, the burden of proof is on you to prove that people are not doing that now. That there is widespread, university-wide, people being given exams that say true or false, I'm a Democrat, or true or false, I'm a Republican. My point is that that's not happening. I do know, and I completely feel for those students who feel intimidated, who feel like they can't speak in that room. I feel for those students, and I counsel them, and I encourage them to stand up and speak up to the extent that they are able. But at the same time, in terms of the policy argument, I haven't seen what you are alleging to have being occurred. I haven't seen widespread exams given in universities where there are ideological purity tests. Bring me that evidence and I'll change my mind. But that's, with a policy argument, your first responsibility is to establish significance and harms of the issue. And I haven't heard that.
Senator Abler, to the A4 Nelson Amendment.
Mr. Chair, I think I've been very much on point. I've actually read most of the amendment to you, so I am squarely on topic here, Mr. President. Well, Senator Putnam, I get it. Part of the work, you know, I've been here long enough to know that some things make a lot of sense to pass when everybody agrees on it, when like, well, if we could put a law in place to keep people like driving on the road and not on the ditch. We have a law about that. Well, people thought that was a good rule, but now people also want to driving in the ditch. It's hard to pass the law because they like driving in a ditch because it's handy or something. That's a pretty silly analogy, but it's the best I could think of on the short notice. And we are actually, Senator Putnam, actually having more debate than usual, even left. Oh, okay. Fine. I guess we're not debating anymore. Sorry for the people at home. I was supposed to keep looking at you, Mr. President. I know that. I just was going to commend my good colleague for having a real debate for once. There are people who think we need these protections. There are people that want us to put safeguards in place. We have speed limits on freeways. We have white lines along the side that people agree, and they were put in place when people agreed we needed to have those. And I will tell you, Mr. President, I don't have 16 anecdotes, but I can tell you that some of the students talk to me, their experiences chilled by virtue of what this amendment would protect. And everybody agrees we shouldn't have these discriminations. We shouldn't have this imposition of my particular view on you, Mr. President, if you're my student. And we're allowing the faculty get to be free to do what they're going to do, but the students, you're on your own. Mr. President, this is absurd. And I'm kind of shocked. Oh, there, you over here hanging out. No, I'm done. I won't ask you to yield on the fourth one. You're just going to say it's nothing either. When people watch us at home, Mr. President, and some people do watch, they go like, why can't you agree on that? I understand we're not going to agree on tax policy, on social policy, on moral policy, because we all have views. And there's a majority here that's kind of more than proclaimed their views on many of these things. But when they're watching, they go like, you can't agree on this? Mr. President, they want us to work together and get things done. They want us to protect their children so they can go to college and university and be free and keep their views or expand their views as they learn. This sort of thing would be a guardrail. And members, I urge you to think independently, the way you said you were going to when you were running, to work together and listen to debate and vote on behalf of the people you represent. Mr. President, I got to think this is a 90% agreement amendment, and I urge members to vote green. Thank you.
Members, we will now go to Senator Duckworth. We're on the A4 amendment.
Thank you, Mr. President. I promise I'll be brief on this. I have no desire to debate a professor on this topic, and I don't have any personal examples I can pull from as it relates to my experience in college. What I will say is this. I mean, to Senator Ayler's point, it seems pretty common sense that if we're going to afford some protections to professors, well, why wouldn't we afford the same protections to students? And simply because I thought I heard during the course of this debate that people were sort of admitting that maybe this does occur. Maybe not, it may not be prevalent, but it does happen from time to time. We heard an example shared by a member. So why wouldn't we pass a bill that would attempt to alleviate that? But really, Mr. President, what inspired me to stand and give remarks was a phrase that was uttered earlier that I could not agree with more, and I think is warranted of some philosophical debate. That is, a respected colleague of mine from across the aisle said, the government should not overregulate or micromanage. Well, my God, I couldn't be in more agreement. I wish we could harness that philosophy when it comes to governing as it relates to many topics that come before this body, whether it's K-12 education, whether it's energy policy, whether it's taxes, you name it. I agree wholeheartedly. Maybe we can end that debate. Let's all agree that we abide by or subscribe to the philosophy that the government should not overregulate or micromanage. If that's the case, why do we have the verbiage in this bill about online program management companies? Why aren't we trusting our institutions of higher education to manage themselves and the way they operate on a day-to-day basis? That's the frustration. And when instances do exist in which the government does step in to regulate or to supposedly micromanage, what are those instances typically? They're instances in which we are protecting freedom or defending constitutional rights. So if we're going to have a debate and we're going to turn to a philosophy of the government shouldn't be overregulating or micromanaging, well, then let's apply it to the very bill we're debating here today, Mr. President. Let's have that reflected in the language that we pass out of this body. Thank you.
Senator Pratt.
Well, thank you, Mr. President. You know, as I heard the discussion about why we shouldn't have this, and Senator Duckworth just touched on it about micromanaging. We have a bill here that's effectively setting in state statute those protections. Now, Senator Putnam mentioned these protections for students are embedded in the university policies. Well, Mr. President, I was just looking at the University of Minnesota's academic freedom. And it says, because academic freedom and responsibility is imbued in any university employee who engages in scholarly work, if collections of individuals or units wish to write or speak on matters of public interest using university resources, they must, 1, include a disclaimer that it's their personal opinion, and 2, they must include their names of affiliations that they have. Sounds like a professor's academic freedom is built within the policy. But if it's so important, Mr. President, that we set that freedom in state statute, and a professor has a position of influence and power over a student, why wouldn't we provide that same statutory protection to that student? That's what's at the heart of this amendment. We want these higher institutions to have exactly what Senator Putnam said. We want them to have that give and take. And if we're going to provide a statutory protection for one, we should provide a statutory protection for the other. Because, Mr. President, I didn't feel that protection until I had a conversation with a sympathetic professor. And I'm very thankful that I had that conversation because I was struggling. And I did a lot better with his guidance. Not every student, particularly at large institutions, may have that ability that I had. I'm thankful for it. And I think that if we are going to have a statute on academic freedom, we should have it for all stakeholders. Thank you, Mr. President.
Senator Gruenhagen.
Well, thank you, Mr. President. Yeah, you know, I try to be a data person rather than a feelings person when I'm making my decisions, okay? And I mean, in some ways, I think the other party wants to diminish the concerns that are brought up here. But if we actually look at a survey and results, we see something quite different. I would encourage all members to research this issue. There's a new Credible Fire survey by over 2,000 college students. And what it found was that more than 1 million students nationwide were investigated or punished for free speech. And you say, what type of free speech? Well, according to the article, it was constitutionally protected expression. So members, we had over 1 million students respond saying they were punished or intimidated for having constitutionally protected free speech on our colleges. Look that up. So this isn't just one here or one there or, you know, just a few here. This isn't based on feelings. This is based on data. And you're applying censorship, lies, and deceit if you do this to these students when they have constitutionally protected free speech. So members, if you believe in our Constitution, U.S. and Minnesota, there is no way that you should support censorship, lies, and deceit by voting against this amendment. Please vote green. Thank you, Mr. President.
Senator Putnam.
Thank you, Mr. President. I promise to be brief and for this to be the last time I speak today. But I do want to say that I would be really curious to see the data that Senator Gruenhagen just cited because it sounds completely implausible to me. But the other thing that's important about it is that those individuals in those classrooms are learning what constitutionally protected free speech is from their college professors in the first place. And the other thing, of course, is that he makes a mistake in characterization of the data itself because it's data about feelings. It's not empirically verifiable data. It's qualitative. So that's a whole different issue that we can get into that I'm not going to because I don't want to bore you on that front. But I also want to say that this actually has been the closest to debate that I've seen in my 3 years in the service, and I'm really proud of you. Especially Senator Pratt, B+ for what you just did there. Very good engagement with the actual issue and extension of the issue, which is what true debate is supposed to do. And I will say in my conversations with other members through this discussion, we're all on the same page. We all absolutely want the same thing. If this is, as Senator Abler refers, belt and suspenders, I don't care. One thing that we might do is perhaps even accept this amendment and keep working on it and give people an opportunity to actually provide some real, tangible, quantitative evidence of individuals who have been graded on exams that were testing their ideology. That would give an opportunity for a real argument to occur. So with that being said, this is all the same stuff. We all agree. I am not, virulently opposed to this amendment because it's doing the right thing, but I'm just saying we're already doing it. So in terms of the amendment, to be honest, I don't really care.
Members, Senator Fateh.
Thank you, Mr. President. I connected offline with, on the side with Senator Abler and Putnam, so we'll be saying that this is a friendly amendment.
Members, any other discussion on what is now the friendly amendment? The A4. Senator Nelson, are you still requesting a roll call vote?
Yeah, we'll do a roll call, but I just want to say I'm thankful this is a friendly amendment. And I'll be glad to give testimony to the senator from St. Cloud about actual examples, but I appreciate the friendly amendment.
Any other discussions on the A4 amendment? Senator Rarick, Senator Nelson is the author, so she was the last person. Thank you. The secretary will take the roll on the A4 Nelson amendment. Members, please vote. Senator Morrison, for those voting pursuant to Rule 40.7.
Thank you, Mr. President. Senator Dietzig votes aye.
Senator Dietzig votes aye.
Mr. President, Senator McEwen votes aye.
Senator McEwen votes aye.
Mr. President, Senator Port votes aye.
Senator Port votes aye. Senator Jasinski, for those voting pursuant to Rule 40.7.
Thank you, Mr. President. Senator Anderson votes aye.
Senator Anderson votes aye. Johnson and Weber are excused. So all senators having voted who desires to vote, the secretary will close the roll. There have been 60 ayes and 5 nays. The A4 Nelson Amendment is adopted. Senator Dames.
Thank you, Mr. President. I have the A9 amendment.
Senator Dames offers the A9 amendment. The secretary will report the A9 Dames amendment.
Senator Dames moves to amend House File Number 4024 as amended pursuant to Rule 45 as follows. Page 44, line 11, after universities, insert. This is the A9 amendment.
Senator Dames to your A9 amendment.
Well, thank you, Mr. President. The A9 amendment, what that does is it exempts Southwest Minnesota State University from the Article 3 parts for the online program management company requirements. The reason I'm requesting this, Southwest Minnesota State University has a very, very strong and robust online program. They have a lot of students that take their online classes, and there's several reasons that that's happening. One of those reasons is the use of the online program management company. They've worked very hard to come up with a company that works very well for them. And this gives them opportunities to reach into parts of the nation that they otherwise would not reach into. The online program is a very, very competitive marketplace, and this allows Southwest Minnesota State to attract students that they otherwise probably would not be able to attract. One of the reasons, there are several reasons for asking for this exemption, but one of them is, with all the new requirements and stuff, as soon as you have a change in a contract, renew your contract, or do anything like that, you're going to have to qualify with these new requirements. I can speak on behalf of Southwest Minnesota State. Their system is not broken. And here we are doing a mandate to try to correct something that's working very, very well. This is going to be, these new requirements are going to be very costly. They're going to take a lot of time. And I think it's important that we recognize the way that the Southwest Minnesota State has been doing this. They have a very successful program, and they've done a lot of vigorous vetting and things like that to make sure that when they've signed a contract with one of these online management companies, that they signed something that's going to work well, and it's going to be fair to both parties and also very fair to the students. So with that said, I'd request a green vote.
Senator Dames, by requesting a green vote, are you asking for a roll call?
Thank you, Mr. President. Yes, I request a roll call.
Roll call requested, roll call granted. Senator Rarick.
Thank you, Mr. President, and thank you, Senator Dames, for bringing this amendment. This is probably the area of most concern that I have in this bill. And we heard a little earlier, just on our last amendment, that debate and discussion is important. And as we work through this, and I have a number of other committees that we do that, and yet I believe this is an area that we have, in Article 3, we have failed to engage in that. Mr. President, our Minnesota institutions already have a policy in place and a very thorough review process for our institutions that engage with these OPMs. These programs are allowing our Minnesota institutions to expand. We all saw during the COVID-19 shutdowns the need and the ability to shift a number of things online. Of course, there are certain things that you have to be physically present in order to do in a learning institution. But we've all seen the shift in the way things are changing. And our Minnesota learning institutions need to keep up with the times. Mr. President, I made the comment earlier, but I'm going to reiterate. There is a lot of cost that goes into propping up a program to go online. Many of our Minnesota institutions do not have it in their budget to make that happen. And that's where they entered into contracts with an OPM so that that group would put the money up front, an investment on their end, and help that institution bring a program online. And they had determined that the model to be able to make that affordable for both the institution and the OPM would be that the OPM would get a percentage of the tuition. Because, Mr. President, without it being online, the institution's going to receive zero tuition from that student. And our Minnesota institutions are competing with institutions across the country, if not around the world, for these students who realize that the online courses are their best options to get their education. Mr. President, I would ask if Senator Kupek would yield for a question.
Senator Kupek, will you yield? He will yield. Senator Rarick.
Thank you, Mr. President. Senator Kupek, as this proposal has come forward, did you have direct discussions with any of the 3 institutions that are currently using OPMs, and if they are in support of the language as amended that you have in this bill?
Senator Kupek, to the question.
Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you, Senator Rarick. I have had discussions with faculty members at Southwest State, which this amendment applies to. We've talked also to people who work within the OPM program at St. Cloud State as well, and I have had conversations with the advocates for the companies, the people that represent the OPMs.
Senator Rarick.
Thank you, Mr. President. And Mr. President, that is exactly why this is the area of concern for me in this bill. We are putting direction in Minnesota state statute for our institutions, 3 of which who already do this, and is working incredibly well for them, and yet they have basically had zero input into this language. Mr. President, if anyone questions where the institutions stand on this, the president of St. Cloud State University was quoted in an article in the Star Tribune, and I can't remember the word, unfortunately, that she used, but this would decimate their program. They would not be able to provide their programs online if they cannot continue to work with the company they have contracted through under the terms that they are currently contracted with them. And I believe Southwest Minnesota State and Carlson School of Business would feel the same way. This is a program that has worked incredibly well for them and has allowed them to expand their reach to students. And without engaging them and getting to know, do they agree with this? We have it in the bill and we're ready to move forward with it. Mr. President, I think Senator Dame's amendment is well warranted so that Southwest Minnesota State which is in his area, has that opportunity to engage in the discussion before they're included in this bill. Members, vote green.
Members, and just so you know, that the OPM that you keep hearing referred to, that stands for Online Program Management. Senator Duckworth.
Thank you, Mr. President. I support the amendment being brought forward by Senator Dames for really one main reason. For all the conversation we're having about OPMs, it's important to understand where the supposed issue originated from. This didn't come from students. We didn't have a bunch of students come to the Higher Education Committee and state that this is an issue for them, that they have a problem with this, that it needs to be changed, modified, or fixed. If anything, we heard the opposite. We heard that, my goodness, because of these offerings, we have way more flexibility, we have way more opportunity when it comes to higher education options than we did before. Folks from St. Cloud State University said they're very worried about this provision in the bill because they think it's going to have a significant detrimental impact on their enrollment. They talked about how their MBA program, this was in a Star Tribune article, went from an enrollment of 28 students to over 400. How is that bad for students? That sounds like more opportunity, that sounds like more people learning, that sounds like brighter futures for Minnesotans. I don't understand why we are over-regulating and micromanaging our colleges and universities. The fact that Senator Dames has to bring forward an amendment for one of the higher institutions he represents in his district saying they want to be exempt or opted out of this should tell us everything we need to know about it. I don't necessarily have an issue with the conversation that perhaps some regulation or reform needs to occur as it relates to these companies and how they're operating with our colleges and universities. My issue is this. We've spent almost no time doing that. We have not had the conversation. The stakeholders have not reached a compromise. This came up just a couple of months ago. Now here we are making it the law of the land in Minnesota. It was the first I heard of it not that long ago. Let's push pause and do our jobs. Let's govern responsibly. Let's not rush and force something through, make it law today in Minnesota, when we have additional time to work on the language, pass something much more reasonable that isn't going to hamstring or harm our colleges and universities from providing opportunities to students. That's what this comes down to, Mr. President. What are we doing for the best interest of our students? And if you support them and their opportunities, you vote green on this amendment.
Senator Lucero, you're going to speak to the A9 amendment. Senator Lucero.
Thank you, Mr. President. And in fact, I'm going to touch on something you had mentioned just a few minutes ago. OPM. Under normal circumstances in this body, OPM stands for other people's money. That's what we're spending. But in this one context, you might be correct, Mr. President. But otherwise, OPM, other people's money.
Any other discussions to the A9 amendment? The last person that we'll go to will be that of Senator Dames. But before that is going to be Senator Fateh. And then Senator Dames will give us our last word. And then you will vote, unless I'm missing someone else. Senator Kupek. So, Senator Fateh, Senator Kupek, and then Senator Dames. In that order, please.
Thank you, Mr. President. I rise to recommend a no vote. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Fateh. Senator Kupek.
Thank you, Mr. President. I will also recommend a no vote on this as well. Southwest Minnesota State, I will say that the program that they have has worked fairly well. Unfortunately, the company that provided that program is no longer with us. They were bought out by another one of these larger companies. And the program at Southwest Minnesota State has been along the lines more of the marketing side of this and less so on the course side. So when I did meet with the faculty from Southwest Minnesota State, they did have positive things to say about the program. Unfortunately, that is not the way that a lot of these programs are going. In the same article in the Star Tribune that has been referenced, if you read the entire article, you will raise a lot of questions, I think, in terms of these quality of these courses that are being offered. And we want to make sure, and I think maybe a reason students didn't come forward is a lot of them do not know that this is going on. And so the big part of this provision here is to cast some more sunshine on that so students know that if they are going to Southwest Minnesota State or St. Cloud State or any one of our fine Minnesota institutions, they know that the education that they are getting from them is from that institution, and when it's not, that needs to be highlighted. So again, I would request a no vote on this amendment.
Senator Dames, you will be the last voice we hear, and then the body will vote on the A9 Dames amendment. Senator Dames.
Well, thank you, Mr. President. And Senator Kupek, I was listening to your comments there, and I find a couple of things kind of interesting. Number one is you did not talk to the administration in any of these institutions. You talked to the professors, but you did not talk to the administration, to the administrators. I find that very interesting. The other piece I want to thank you for is your statement that the faculty at Southwest Minnesota State said the program works very well. And that is very true. The program works very well. And in the most recent contract that Southwest Minnesota State has signed, they did a very rigorous process, went through a very rigorous process to pick the company that they were going to continue to work with. And that worked fairly well. I just want people to keep a few things in mind. With all the new regulations that we're going to have, that's going to put the Minnesota public institutions that use these programs, it's going to put them at a major disadvantage. And they're going to have a harder time attracting thousands of opportunities, thousands of students that are looking to be online and go through part of these programs to find institutions that meets their needs in order to do their online studies. This will also have a problem with students trying to prioritize where they want to get their online work, where their online college from, is because there will be less chances to do that. It limits the opportunities for workforce development. There's a lot of students that look at the online classes and they're working adults. And the opportunity for them to get their education comes through the online process. And it also, they have to find the colleges that have what they want in order to make that work. By passing this bill, it's going to give limited marketing flexibility to the higher education institutions that use this. And also, it's going to create financial and risk burdens for Southwest Minnesota State. I asked for a green vote, and another reason I'm asking for a green vote is we know that the education system is getting to be a very, very competitive system. And so when we have somebody, a college, that looks outside the box and takes a look at putting together a strong online program, and part of what makes that program strong is the fact that they can use these online program management companies that have been thoroughly vetted, and certainly we don't want to have colleges using third-party vendors that take advantage of students. And this is certainly not the case in Southwest Minnesota State. They have a very rigorous and transparent vetting process that they go through when they go through these contract processes. So members, on behalf of Southwest Minnesota State, please vote green and allow them to run and manage their college the way we should be leaving them do it. And instead of taking away opportunities, let's make sure that we bless and add some opportunities. Thank you, members.
Members, the Secretary will take the roll on the A9 Dames Amendment. Please vote. Senator Morrison, for those voting under Rule 40.7.
Thank you, Mr. President. Senator Dietzig votes no.
Senator Dietzig votes no.
Mr. President, Senator McEwen votes no.
Senator McEwen votes no.
And Mr. President, Senator Port votes no.
And Senator Port votes no. Senator Jasinski, for those voting under Rule 40.7.
Thank you, Mr. President. Senator Anderson votes aye.
Senator Anderson votes aye. All senators having voted who desires to vote, the secretary will close the roll. There have been 30 ayes and 34 noes. The A9 Dames Amendment is not adopted. Senator Farnsworth.
Thank you, Mr. President. I would like to offer the A8 amendment.
Senator Farnsworth offers the A8 amendment, and the secretary will report the A8 amendment.
Senator Farnsworth moves to amend House File Number 4024 as amended pursuant to Rule 45 as follows. Page 8, line 5, delete proof of a disability. This is the A8 amendment.
Senator Farnsworth to your A8 amendment.
Thank you, Mr. President. I did speak with the bill's author about this beforehand, so I think it's still going to be friendly. So basically, this just changes the little bit of the wording so that when a student self-reports a disability, that begins the process to determine accommodations that would be necessary later on. So it's just clearing up the language, but it maintains the original intent of the bill.
Senator Fateh to the A8 Farnsworth amendment.
Thank you, Mr. President, and thank you, Senator Farnsworth, for bringing this forward. We discussed this offline, and I will say that this is a friendly amendment. Thank you.
Any other discussion on the A8 Farnsworth amendment? Seeing none, all in favor say aye. All opposed say no. The motion prevails and the A8 Farnsworth amendment is adopted. Members, any other amendments to Senate File Number 4003? Seeing none, the Secretary will give the bill its third reading.
House File Number 4024, a bill for an act relating to higher education, making policy and technical changes to certain higher education provisions.
Third reading. Third reading. Any other discussion before we go to the author of the bill? Senator Duckworth.
Thank you, Mr. President. I appreciate it, and my thanks to Senator Fateh for bringing forward this bill and allowing us to have a good discussion and debate today. You know, often in the course of our discussions on the floor, when we're talking about an omnibus bill, sometimes we do lose sight of some of the good things that are contained in it. And I will take a moment to highlight some of those before I highlight some of the issues I still have with the bill as it stands. There's some good aspects of the bill as it relates to transcript access for students, providing support for parenting students, and as well as pregnant students. There's additional help for foster children in the bill and students with disabilities. I think there was a good provision that had to do with workforce development in the field of energy. Some updates to sexual harassment and assault policies were also considered in the bill. So that's not to say that the bill in its entirety is negative in my opinion. However, I do think there are still some outstanding issues with the bill I'd like us to consider working on and potentially resolve in conference committee if it finds its way there. I think the OPM issue needs a little bit more work. I'd like to see our colleges and universities that utilize this tool keep it a part of their resource belt that they can use to serve students. I also think we need to do a lot more work as it pertains to funding for students who attend either public or private colleges and whether or not they're eligible to utilize those funds. But more importantly, Mr. President, I want to highlight a significant issue for the entire body as it relates to higher education in general. This may not have been obviously the appropriate bill for this to be put in, but it's the appropriate bill and the appropriate committee for sure to have this conversation. And that is the fact that we had the University of Minnesota, on behalf of all of its campuses and students, come before this committee and let us know that they have about a $500 million need when it comes to the critical infrastructure of the buildings on their campuses. And that's just the University of Minnesota system. Last year, when we had a $19.5 billion surplus and decided to allocate it as we did and also increase taxes, that was a decision that was made. It is what it is. But I believe that what we prioritize in this legislature, especially when it comes to the investments that we make, is extremely important. And it's also important, and it's worth noting for the public, that they keep it in perspective. I can see through the very window before me out the tiring room a $750 million hole that represents a state office building being built for elected officials and state government. You could have funded every single critical infrastructure request that the University of Minnesota across all of its campuses had, and still had $250 million left over to build whatever office you feel you have the need to build. And I can't think of anything that more physically represents an issue that we have here in the state when it comes to our spending priorities. If we're going to talk about the well-being of students and trying to keep tuition low, trying to keep it affordable for students and families, yet here, the very people that represent these colleges and universities come before the state, outline critical needs that they have been outlining for years, choose to ignore them, and spend $750 million on something that's really not necessary, let's be honest, then we are failing dramatically as leaders and elected officials. We are not putting future generations and their higher education needs and experiences at the forefront of the decisions we're making here in the legislature. So all that to say, Mr. President, that as we continue forward and we discuss whether it's this bill or others coming before us and we make appropriations, let's be true to our word and actually prioritize the things that are important to the people of Minnesota and their children. Thank you.
Members, just as a reminder, we are on final passage of House File 4024 as amended. Senator Eric.
Thank you, Mr. President. And I'm not going to reiterate any of the comments by Senator Duckworth, but I agree 100% with what he said. But, Mr. President, I have to stand one more time to talk about Article 3 of this bill, and it is why I'll be voting no today. Mr. President, this is a concept that we've seen for approximately 2 months when the bill originally came forward. The discussion was all centered around concerns by one group that brought it forward. And that's how ideas come to us here at the Capitol. A group that has an issue comes forward to start a discussion. But I think as we've talked about here today on the floor, those discussions have not expanded to all those impacted by this legislation. And until those discussions happen, Article 3 has no place in this bill. Are there parts of Article 3 that I agree with to put guardrails around these companies? Absolutely. But there are other parts that will prevent them from operating with our institutions in Minnesota. Mr. President, these companies should be viewed as assets to our Minnesota institutions. They should be viewed as a group that can help expand our reach for Minnesota institutions to this new developing way of reaching students that many of our institutions will not be able to do on their own. Until we've actually engaged with the students who participate that way, engage with the institutions who have done it, and engage more deeply with the companies that are bringing that forward, I just don't see that this language is ready to be included in Minnesota state statutes. Mr. President, I could go on on this one. It just needs to be discussed more before we're actually willing to make this the law. We talked about it with other areas today as well, that it already is in policies, and to make this state statute, I find troubling. Passing this today, as it stands, you're basically saying that I do not trust the ability of our institutions and their lawyers to negotiate a contract and compensation with these companies. We as a legislature are going to step in because we can do it better. Mr. President, I don't agree with that statement, and unfortunately we'll have to vote no on the bill with Article 3 in it. Thank you.
Senator Oumou Verbeten.
Thank you, Mr. President. I just want to thank Chair Fateh and the members of the Higher Education Committee. It's been great to be on that committee again this year. I appreciate the conversations that we have, and I'm really grateful that my bill to ban legacy admissions is in the Higher Education Omnibus. It prohibits institutions from giving preferential treatment in admission decisions to applicants based on their familial relationship to an alumni or donor of the institution. And this is important because those admissions are not equitable. And admission decisions should be based on merit and academic achievement, not on your family's connections, and certainly not on how much money your family donates to a university. Thank you, members. Please vote for the bill.
Senator Gruenhagen. And members, as a reminder, we're on House File 4024 as amended. Senator Gruenhagen.
Oh, thank you, Mr. President. Yeah, I actually appreciated that last comment from Senator Obervuten. Did I say that right?
Senator Oumou Verbeten. Senator Gruenhagen.
I don't think she gets Gruenhagen right very often either, so.
I know it's Gruenhagen. I just thought it would be a good little joke there. Senator Gruenhagen.
Oh, thank you, Mr. President. Yeah, I just want to thank the Higher Ed Committee, too. When I was in the other body, I served on higher education. I know the amount of work and time that goes into it, and appreciate their efforts. I do have to, however, come back to the provision for giving benefits for illegal immigrants. You know, members, I did 13 years of jail ministry, okay? I wasn't in jail, but I did jail ministry. So I've dealt with these people. I know them personally in my district. And to give them additional benefits to incentivize them to come through the gauntlet of exploitation for their children, their women, and even the men, and enrich cartels, I mean, it's the next thing to slavery, in my opinion. And that's what we're doing. We're trying to incentivize them to come through that gauntlet. And I have to vote to stand up for them. They need to come here legally, and we need to stop giving benefits to incentivize them to be exploited. Thank you, Mr. President.
Members, just so that you know, we're on final passage of House File 4024 as amended. The last voice that we'll hear before voting will be that of Senator Fateh. Any other discussions before I go to Senator Fateh? Senator Dames.
Well, thank you, Mr. President. And there are certainly some things in the bill that are certainly go in a positive direction. But the one, Article number 3, I just really think that that's getting the cart ahead of the horse. I think that there should have been a lot more negotiations done on this so that everybody could get on the same page. I think it's unfortunate that when somebody works in education, we quickly pass bills to try to make sure it doesn't continue to work. There was not really any problems with the way that these were contract companies, and so it's unfortunate, and I'll be voting against the bill.
Now we're going to the author of the bill, which will be the last voice we'll hear before we vote. Senator Fateh.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'll try to be very brief. I want to say thank you to the committee members from the Higher Ed Committee. I want to say thank you to the members today also for the discussions and engaging and putting in their opinions on how to make the bill better. And I hope that we earn a yes vote from all of you. Thank you.
With that being said, the Secretary will take the roll for final passage of House File 4024 as amended. Members, please vote. Senator Morrison, for those voting pursuant to Rule 40.7.
Thank you, Mr. President. Senator Dietzig votes aye.
Senator Dietzig votes aye.
Mr. President, Senator McEwen votes aye.
Senator McEwen votes aye.
Senator Port votes aye.
Senator Port votes aye.
And Mr. President, Senator Bolden votes aye.
Senator Bolden votes aye. Senator Jasinski, for those voting pursuant to Rule 40.7.
Thank you, Mr. President. Senator Anderson votes no.
Senator Anderson votes no. Members, just a note to recognize that Senator Bowden did vote in person. All senators having voted who desires to vote, the secretary will close the roll. There being 41 ayes and 26 noes, the bill is passed and its title agreed to. Members, staying on special orders, our next bill is House File 3071. Senator Oumou Verbeten. It is creating a plain language driver's license manual and written examination working group and appropriations. With that being said, Senator Oumou Verbeten.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'm excited to bring forward this bill today that will require the Department of Vehicle Services to rewrite the driver's license knowledge examination using plain language standards. Plain language meets readers' needs. It's clear, simplified language that follows a specific set of grammatical standards. These plain language standards are outlined in the bill, and they come from the Federal Plain Writing Act of 2010 and an Executive Order 1407. This bill instructs the Division of Driver and Vehicle Services Test Maintenance Committee specifically to rewrite the test by February 15, 2025. The committee must convene its first meeting for this work by August 1st and must meet at least 4 times by January 1st, 2025 before publishing the new written examination. They can enter into an agreement with a third party to participate in revisions to meet plain language standards, and the Commissioner of Public Safety is also required to submit a report to the Transportation Committees by February 1st, 2026 on implementation. Lastly, this bill appropriates $212,000 to the Driver and Vehicle Services operating account in the Special Revenue Fund for the cost of rewriting the driver's manual and knowledge test using plain language standards. Also covers the cost of translation into several other languages, and it's a one-time appropriation. Let me tell you about why this bill is necessary. And I just want to clarify that this is not making the test easier. It doesn't change the material that's being tested. It simply makes sure that people understand the questions that are being asked of them. When folks can understand the question, they can clearly demonstrate their knowledge of Minnesota's traffic and driving laws. And it'll prevent situations where a person taking the test knows the correct answer to a question, but gets it wrong solely because the question was written in a needlessly complex way. And this is really important for English language learners. Amna Kiran, an English language learner teacher at Andover High School, actually brought this to my attention, and she noticed that English language learners were having a really hard time with this test. It was even folks who had been, driving cars for decades in their home countries or did it as a profession previously, but they were struggling to pass that written test here. And these folks know how to drive, so why was the test so difficult for them? It's really because of the way the test is written. It's wordy, it uses complex and compound sentence structures and confusing terms. And I'm happy to give y'all an example. The test asks a question like, backing up is not allowed on freeways or expressways except for, and then lists multiple choice. But if it was written using plain language standards, the question would simply read, backing up on freeways is allowed only for, and then list the options. Plain language removes the double negatives like not allowed and except for, and it omits excess unnecessary words like expressways. Again, this is confusing for not just our English language learners, but actually native English speakers as well. And I remember taking the written test in high school, having to take it a second time because I was getting really confused by the way the questions were worded. And I'm a native English speaker and struggled with this as well. The state of Maryland recently implemented plain language standards in their test, and in Maryland, it was really disability activists who led the charge because this is also an accessibility issue. The ACT and SAT implemented plain language standards in 2014. So this is all to say that writing in plain language is a best practice and it does benefit everyone. We also know that by making the test clearer, people will be able to better understand those questions and demonstrate their knowledge. Hopefully this will also reduce the need for repeated test attempts and frequent visits to driver's test facilities. That could ultimately reduce wait times at facilities across our state. So everyone deserves to know the questions that are being asked of them. We can implement plain language standards in this written test to ensure that. It's the best practice. Everyone benefits. This is really simple, but it's an important thing we can do to improve the lives of Minnesotans. Please vote yes.
Any other discussion? We are on House File 3071. Any additional discussion before going forward? Seeing none, the Secretary will give the bill its third reading.
House File Number 3071, a bill for an act relating to transportation, driver, and vehicle services requiring incorporation of plain language standards for written driver's examinations and the driver's manual.
Third reading. Senator Hoffman.
Thank you, Mr. President, and thank you, Senator Oumou Verbeten. Back in December, had a business owner from Champlin named Tim Hutner from Hutner Enterprises has a mechanic who could not pass this test due to the issues that Senator Oumou Verbeten is talking about. 20 times this individual has tried to take the test, and because of the use of language in it, it's not okay because he was unable to pass. And even to this day, this is really going to help him. And let me tell you, Mr. President, the gentleman I'm talking about works on cars. And if you ask the good senator from Pine City, that Senator Cran, he knows which kind of cars I'm talking about. This kinds of cars that this gentleman is an expert working on are cars that aren't $30,000 cars. These are $350,000 and up cars that really know. The guy knows cars and he knows vehicles. But unfortunately, he's not able to pass the test that he was at one time had a driver's license because of this language and how it's used. He's a gentleman who's originally from Mexico. And so it also leads to the fact that if somebody has maybe a hidden learning disability, they don't understand it. I am so appreciative that Senator Oumou Verbeten has taken this bill and it's in front of us today. So members, please vote yes on this wonderful bill.
Any other discussion on House File 3071 before we take a vote? Seeing none, any final comments? Senator Oumou Verbeten.
Thank you, Mr. President. I just want to thank Senator Hoffman, who a year ago brought this huge pile over to my office and said, we've got an issue with the driver's test, and there's this woman, Amna, that you need to meet. Can you please figure it out? And we worked together, and we figured that out. And I also just want to thank my legislative assistant, Tristan Vagley, for working really hard over the interim with Amna Curran on this. Amna has spent years working with the Department of Vehicle Services, trying to reach out to them about this issue. She's, of course, worked for years with English language learners, trying to pass this written test, and just want to say she's the type of teacher who clearly goes above and beyond for her students. She is literally changing the law to improve their lives. We have amazing teachers in this state, and Amna Curran is certainly one of those. This is a really great bill. I'm proud to have bipartisan support. Again, people deserve to understand the questions that are being asked of them. Plain language is best practice. It benefits us all. Please vote yes.
Members, the Secretary will take the roll on final passage of House File 3071. Please vote. Senator Morrison, for those voting under Rule 40.7.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, Senator Dietzig votes aye.
Senator Dietzig votes aye.
Mr. President, Senator McEwen votes aye.
Senator McEwen votes aye.
And thank you, Mr. President, Senator Port votes aye.
Senator Port votes aye.
Mr. President.
Senator Jasinski, for those voting pursuant to Rule 40.7.
Senator Anderson votes aye.
Senator Anderson votes aye. All senators having voted who desires to vote, the secretary will close the roll. There being 62 ayes and 5 noes, the bill is passed and its title agreed to. Members, we have a couple housekeeping things to do, so we're going to move a little differently. So I'm going to call on Senator Murphy for a motion to recess for the purposes of putting together conference committees. Senator Murphy.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move for a brief recess for the purpose of appointing conference committees.
On that motion, all in favor say aye. All those opposed say no. The motion prevails. The Senate is now in recess. The Senate will come back to order. Senator Murphy.
Thank you, Mr. President. Is there a privileged report at the desk?
Yes, there is. The secretary will read the report.
Senator Murphy from the Subcommittee on Conference Committees recommends that the following senators be, and they hereby are appointed as a conference committee on Senate File Number 3567, Senators Swedzinski, May Quaid, and Abler. Senate File Number 3852, Senators McEwen, Hoschild, and Oumou Verbeten. House File Number 3436, Senators Dibble, Morrison, and Jasinski. Senator Murphy moves that the foregoing appointments be approved.
To that motion, all in favor say aye. All those opposed say no. The motion prevails. Members remaining under the order of business of motions and resolutions, we will revert to the 5th order of business, reports of committees. Member, there is a committee report to be read at the desk. The secretary will read the reports.
Senator Latz from the Committee on Judiciary and Public Safety, to which was referred Senate File Number 2026, a bill for an act relating to transportation, authorizing traffic safety camera enforcement in certain specified areas. Reports the same back with a recommendation that the bill be amended as follows, and when so amended, the bill do pass and be re-referred to the Committee on Transportation.
Members, pursuant to Rule 2.03, the bill was referred to the Committee on Rules and Administration. Members, we will now proceed to the 13th order of business, which is announcements of Senate interest. Without objection, the following senators will be excused from today's session: Anderson, Johnson, and Weber, Anderson from 11 to 11:30, Johnson and Weber from 1 to 1:45, and Nelson from 1:20 to 1:45. Members, also for those who are on the Jobs and Economic Development Committee, we will meet immediately after session. Senator Latz.
Mr. President, Judiciary Committee will meet in room G15 immediately following adjournment. Thank you.
Senator Frentz.
Thank you, Mr. President. Members, the Senate Energy, Utilities, Environment, and Climate Committee will not be meeting. Thank you, members.
Any other announcements of Senate interest? Senator Farnsworth.
Thank you, Mr. President. I just would like to remind the body and staff that in 2 days, on the 17th, we will have the Ranger Party. So all senators and staff are invited at Mancini's from 5 to 7 o'clock. So please come have a great time.
Any other announcements of Senate interests? Senator Huffman.
Thank you, Mr. President. I just want to remind the members of the Human Services Committee that we will be meeting at 3 o'clock today. Thank you, Mr. President.
Any other announcements? Again, jobs will meet immediately after session. Yep, I did the excuses they were asking me. All right, seeing no, oh, Senator Johnson.
Sorry, Mr. President. I was out of the chambers when Senate Resolution 92 came up. Just in recognition of those in our staff who have been here for numerous years, whether it's a 5, 10, 25, or 30-year anniversary. And I just wanted to say a heartfelt thank you from the Senate Republican Caucus to those who have been here and participated, helped us along. I know when I first got elected in 2016, my biggest fear was I didn't know how to write a bill, introduce a bill, pass a law. And what I found out very quickly was we have got some very experienced and capable people in this institution that will take you along and show you the ropes and really hold your hand through that process. And I could not be more grateful and proud of those people serving this Minnesota Senate. And so I'd just like to say thank you from the Republican caucus to those who serve.
Thank you, Senator Johnson. Seeing no other comments, I'm going to Senator Murphy for a motion to adjourn.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move that the Senate do now adjourn until Thursday, April 18th at 11 a.m.
On that motion, all in favor say aye. All those opposed say no. The motion prevails and the Senate is now adjourned.